Okay, welcome everybody to this special meeting of the City of Angels City Council, November 13th, 2017. Would you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That's cool hearing so many people say that. Okay. We have the agenda in front of us, and do I hear a motion to approve the agenda? Motion.
Second.
A motion by Councilperson Oliveira, second by Councilperson McCurdy to approve the agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Okay. Now we're going to enter into the public comment section of the meeting. The public comment section is for things that are not on the agenda. So if anybody has a comment they'd like to make about something not on the agenda tonight, please step forward and take the mic.
Yes, good evening. Craig Turco, Angels Camp. Since you already approved the agenda, and I know you can't comment on during this session, I've got 3 ordinances, one that was from Friday and 2 from tonight. So I know you can't comment, but Friday, this was on the website. These 2 were not.
Excuse me, Craig, I can comment on that.
Yeah.
The ones you picked up tonight are the ones you're going to use. The one previous to this has been revised just to...
I understand that, but, and again, I don't expect you to respond, you don't have to, but we did the homework on the one from Friday, not tonight. We haven't seen this, and it makes me think if the council's even seen the new ones. So I'm a little concerned that we're talking about several things. For an example, one of the sections I'm going to refer to has been changed in one of these other drafts. So as we go through it, and I hope the council members have read both of these new ones, so that just needs to be brought out because it wasn't out there 72 hours. And that's just what I heard you say, so that's it. Thank you.
And also, these ordinances that are here, I'm kind of treating them a little bit like worksheets. Nothing set in stone. They're for discussion purposes only, and we'll be discussing and then trying to take action based on our discussions.
And I appreciate that feedback, but you have to understand that most of us who did our due diligence is using a piece of documentation that is not what you folks are discussing tonight. So,
I understand. Thank you. Any other comment about a subject not on the agenda?
My name is Bob Holston, and I live at 576 Springhouse Drive in Angels Camp. And I just want to bring up an LLD issue that hasn't been in front of anyone for quite a while, and that has to do with the wetlands. We had a big project last year where there was quite a bit of cleanup done on the wetlands, but it seems like things have stopped and nothing has happened this year. I know that the council has passed a wetlands maintenance budget, and I'm not sure that even that budget for this year has been spent, but we want to maintain that wetland so we don't get in the same place we were for the last 8 or 10 years. So I would like the council to put that on the agenda and give a report to us at Greenhorn Creek, letting us know what the program is for wetlands maintenance and the financial situation that we have to deal with that. But it's something that if we don't take care of it, it's going to go back to where it was before we had the big problem. So I would appreciate it if you would put that on the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, council members and staff. I'm Jack Lynch. I live at 600 Selkirk Ranch Road in Angels Camp. There seems to be some rumblings and confusion about the financial health of our city. I'd like to speak to you about this matter for the record and for any possible response from staff or council members. When I read through the financials for the cities as posted on the city website, here's what I see. In the city's general fund, which covers city officials, city attorney, city engineer, administration, finance, community support, building and planning, the museum, the fire department, the police department, public works, I see a fund balance in excess of $1 million. In the city's other major functions of the water and wastewater funds, there is a combined fund balance in excess of $7 million. All of these reserves are excellent, in my opinion. Further, if there was a need for additional city revenues, I'd like to suggest that the current transient occupancy tax, or TOT as we know it, which is about $1,100,000 annually, could be increased by raising the current rate of 10% to 12%. This change would bring an additional $220,000 annually. If there was a need for additional revenues, the city could consider an increase of 0.5% in the sales tax, just as exists in our neighboring city of Sonora. This change would add an estimated $500,000 annually to city revenues. In summary, it appears to me that the city is in good financial shape. It also has two reasonable and competitive options available to increase revenues if they are needed. Thank you.
Good evening, Steve DeFew, 576 Sasso Place, Angels Camp. I'm a little confused, and Mr. Turco got up here, I'd like to address the mayor on this, and he addressed the original agenda from Friday and then two today. Did you imply that this was not going to be decided tonight, that you were going to take all this information into consideration for a future decision? You implied, you said, because they were so different that you just wanted everybody's input. I'm a little confused about that.
That's not what I said, but
What did you say?
these ordinances are examples of what we might pass tonight. We're going to have a discussion and take an action at the will of the council. That doesn't mean something won't be added or omitted or changed.
Oh, okay, through
more like a workshop.
discussion from the floor?
Pardon me?
Through the discussion through the evening from the people in
We're going to,
attendance
of course, we're going to consider
Okay.
public comment before we make a decision.
Okay, and then I wasn't going to address, I didn't know Jack had something to say, but along with the argument that I've been hearing that the city needed the money down the line for 10 years to protect the status of the city has ignored the public response at times about the high salary base that has existed in this city for the last 17 years that I've been here. When I moved here, the city manager was making $185,000 a year, and the population was 3,100 people, and the police chief was making $175,000 a year. So I don't know, everybody should know this. They can get everybody's salary through the Right of Information Act, but when members of the city council start using the argument that the city might be going broke in 10 years, they ought to start learning how to manage the constituents' money. Thank you.
I have to respond to that one just a little bit. The salaries are nowhere near where Mr. DeFew just said they were, so maybe we're already doing a good job in getting those trimmed down. Any other comments on items not on the agenda? Okay, we'll go ahead and close the public comment and move on to our agenda item tonight. Our agenda item is to consider the adoption of an urgency, I have to get my glasses here, urgency moratorium ordinance concerning the cultivation, commercial, and retail sale and delivery of marijuana and related land uses, and two, to find that the adoption of this urgency ordinance is exempt under the California Environmental Quality Act. Derek Cole, our attorney, before we get into this, I just want to make a statement, kind of how we'd like to see things go tonight. We do have two ordinances in front of us, and I'll summarize them real quick so that we kind of set a background and set a base for discussion, and then we'll go forward. The first ordinance would allow, under a conditional use permit, the manufacturing, distribution, testing, and home delivery of cannabis products and ban everything else. State law dictates that cannabis growers can only sell their plants to a licensed distributor via a licensed transporter. The distributor arranges for the plants to be tested by a licensed lab, and once the plants are deemed satisfactory, they're then labeled and sold to retailers or to manufacturers. Manufacturers can only buy from and sell to distributors. Manufactured products are tested again before being sold to retailers, and if a product fails a test, it's destroyed in a safe manner pursuant to state regulations. The manufacturer is a heavily regulated business and a safe way to produce edibles, creams, oils, and other products. They have extraction machines that a lot of people are concerned with, and the extraction machines are touted as explosion-proof. Extractions made in an unregulated environment without proper equipment can be very dangerous. The distribution center is like a large warehouse. The transporters will drive their trucks all the way into the warehouse. The warehouse door is closed, and then the truck is unloaded. There's live security on hand 24/7. The product comes from the growers in sealed bags, so there's no loose product. The lab will take a small sample of that product for testing. Each building is constructed with all safety and filtered systems so that there's no danger to the public or unpleasant odors. The deliveries are simple for those residents who want or who would like to order the product and have it delivered to their homes. Angels Camp will not have a retail outlet, so all these orders come from outside the city. The second ordinance is essentially an outright ban of all cannabis-related activities except those mandated, allowed by state. So that's what we're discussing tonight. We're not discussing any specific application or any specific site. That's for a later meeting, a later time. And we have had questions regarding the recusal of council members who may have an interest in this industry, and I would ask Derek to comment on that.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, first and foremost, as far as conflicts of interest, all of you are aware of the Political Reform Act and the requirements that places. You have training. We've discussed this in the past. Obviously, I can't advise any of you specifically because I'm the city's attorney, but I'm not aware, based on your personal situations, of any conflicts tonight. I'm not aware of any material financial interest any of you possess in this ordinance, and nor am I aware of any impacts that this ordinance would have on any of your any disclosable interests. So obviously, if any of you feel that you have an interest, that's something that should be declared up front, and we should talk about that. But unless I just don't, based on the information I know, I don't see anything that is of concern. So again, if you feel that's something that needs to be vetted, we can do that. Otherwise, I'll simply go ahead and jump into a brief staff report. And Mr. Mayor, thank you for your summary. I think you've done a very good job of summarizing what is in front of the council. If I can elaborate, and in response to what a previous speaker said, there are copies up here that the city clerk has provided. On Tuesday, last Tuesday at your regular meeting, we were scheduled to consider an ordinance, a moratorium ordinance, and because of the amount of people, we had to reschedule that meeting to this theater. On Friday, an agenda was published online with the same ordinance that was presented for your consideration on Tuesday. So the speaker who referenced the posting of the agenda is correct. There was an ordinance draft that was posted online Friday. Two things happened following the posting of that agenda. One is our police chief did request an addition to the delivery section. And so what I did over the weekend is I made a slight change to the ordinance that was posted online Friday. And I'll refer, if any members of the public have the packets that are distributed up here. If you look at the very bottom left corner, you'll see the words ban option. There's a little file name. The ban option is the name of the packet that I would refer you to, and if you flip to the,
I think it's a regulate option.
oh, excuse me, no, okay, you're correct. The regulate option, so my apologies, you're correct, Mr. Mayor. If you look where it says regulate option at the bottom left and you flip to the, near the back, there's a page 5, and then if you'll look and you'll see a little paragraph 5, and you'll see underlined, what we call red line, even though it's not showing up as red on the copy. But basically, all we did in the regulate option version, which is the version that was posted on Friday, is add one sentence in that, or actually 2 sentences in, to the portion about deliveries that says that any persons who will make deliveries within the city would have to have a background check that is conducted by the police department through what's called the Interstate Identification Index, which is something the police chief brought to my attention. So I just want to make clear that the ordinance that was posted online Friday, which was presented to this council last Tuesday, has only been slightly changed to add that language in about a background check. Nothing else has been made, no other changes, no other additions, no deletions. So basically what you have as the regulate option is essentially what you had last Tuesday with one slight tweak that I think I think we need to consider because our police chief has requested it. And it is shown in red lines so that if the council tonight doesn't want to make that change, it's certainly the prerogative to remove that. But I feel like it's important when our law enforcement makes a request that it be brought to your attention. There is a second version of this ordinance, and this may be where there is some confusion, and I understand that. It was requested of me by 2 council members that for the sake of the consideration tonight, there be a second option presented, and that would be what I would call the ban option, which is basically we ban everything to the extent that we can. That option was drafted. That option was, I did that over the weekend. Again, I was very busy last week, and I tried to draft as quickly as I could, but I presented that to the council via email over the weekend. It was provided to the city clerk first thing this morning. She did make copies, and basically this would be, essentially, as I said, it would ban everything to the extent that state law allows. I did this because it was requested by 2 of you. Obviously, we will take public comment tonight, and then the 5 of you, I'm sure, will have a lively discussion. But basically, I would say that these 2 ordinances are sort of bookends to what you could do. For the sake of the council and for the sake of the public, I did this morning prepare a very simple chart. It looks like this, if any members of the public are out there. But basically, what I tried to do is succinctly summarize what option 1, which I call the regulate option, would do, and what option 2, which I call the total ban option, would do. And I summarized into 7 different areas of regulation. Let me start by saying that both ordinances would do the same things for the first 3 areas of regulation. Outdoor cultivation would be banned entirely. And that's for any purpose, and that's for commercial or medical or personal. So no person within city limits would be allowed to cultivate marijuana under the either ordinance that has been presented to you. Then there's the subject of indoor cultivation, and as I have advised this council previously in our workshops, state law does not allow cities to ban indoor cultivation entirely. That's the one caveat where the new Proposition 64, which is the initiative that was passed last November, which has now been morphed into something called MAUCRASA. That's the acronym. But the initiative guarantees that every person shall have a right to grow within their own residence 6 plants. So we have to allow that. There's no, I just want to make clear to members of the public who may be coming to this discussion, having not seen our previous discussions or perhaps not having read about this subject, we cannot take away the right to grow 6 plants indoors from anyone residing in a lawful residence. State law guarantees that as a right. What we can do is regulate the conditions under which the growing occurs, and the ordinances, both versions have the same language. There's a series of conditions that would be placed on the right of people to grow indoors. So that's, the indoor cultivation subject is the one area where we have to allow some activity. We can regulate it, we cannot ban it. Then there's the issue of commercial and retail sales. Both ordinances prohibit that. So there would be no commercial storefronts, no dispensaries. Even though our ordinance does allow medical marijuana dispensaries, we would not allow recreational dispensaries, retail outlets, whatever, however someone might form some entity that would sell marijuana from a storefront, those would be banned within city limits under both ordinances. So the last 4 subjects are areas where the options diverge. And under the regulate option, essentially, we would have the ability to say no, but we would allow people to request to operate a manufacturing facility, operate a distribution center, or operate a testing lab with a conditional use permit. And the way that would work is they would make the application and they would be subject to the findings that we have for conditional use permits, which are very broad. They allow the city great leeway to condition hours of operation, areas of operation, locations, anything that you could impose as a CUP, you could impose on those facilities. So when I call this the regulate option, it does not mean automatically if you select this option that those uses would actually be able to locate in the city. What it would mean is that people could submit applications to operate such a facility in the city. They would then go through the regular review that any permit applicant goes through in the city. It would go to the Planning Commission at a minimum, and then if anyone disliked the Planning Commission's decision, it would come to you as a city council on appeal. So the regulate option is somewhat of a misnomer in that it doesn't necessarily mean there will actually be marijuana land uses popping up within the city. It just means that people can make an application to have such a facility, and we, the city, ultimately can say yes or no, just as we can for any conditional use permit. Then there's the issue of deliveries, and the regulate option allows deliveries, but it puts several conditions on those deliveries. I do want to emphasize, and again, I know there's a lot of members of the public here, so we've had these discussions a number of times. The city cannot stop people from driving through town with marijuana in their cars for delivery to other places. In other words, if they come from San Andreas and they go to Sonora, we can't say you can't bring marijuana through our city. We can't do that. State law says we cannot prohibit people from traveling on public roads with the product. What we can do is prohibit them from delivering to doorsteps within city limits. And so the regulate option doesn't do that. What it does is it regulates the conditions by which people may receive marijuana, such as the transactions have to be cashless, the cars have to be unmarked. And I would note that one, and again, it's not my place to make a policy decision, but one reason why it may seem rational to allow deliveries is that people then can have their purchases made in other cities and other locales, and they can be discreetly distributed to them at their home, which presumably doesn't require them to congregate at a storefront. And so, there are reasons why you may want, even if you ban everything else, to allow storefront or door-to-door deliveries, because it avoids the sort of the central facilities where people would go. But again, that's a policy decision. And that's the left-hand side of the column here. That's the regulate option. The option 2, the ban option, would essentially ban everything. It would say you cannot have a manufacturing facility, you cannot have a distribution center, you cannot have a testing lab, and you cannot have deliveries within city limits. So tonight, ultimately, the process, just so, again, we have many members of the public here who may not have the same knowledge that we have. We've been dealing with this for the better part, or probably more than a year. This is a special section of the government code that allows us to enact an emergency or urgency ordinance. It's often called a moratorium because often you're saying you can't institute this use in our city until we have time to look at it, but you can't actually regulate with the ordinance. You don't have to completely ban everything. You can regulate it, you can ban it to a certain extent, but regulate it. The idea is that this urgency ordinance can last up to 2 years, and the purpose is to allow cities to basically be able to study an issue, but not study the issue while it's popping up all around them. It gives them some breathing room. It says, we're going to stop all of this, we're going to prevent all of this from happening while we take a look at it. And basically the process can last up to 2 years. And the idea is within that 2 years, we will have the time we need to actually really vet the issues out and come up with permanent regulations. And so what I would emphasize is no matter what we do tonight, this will not be the final say on the issue of marijuana regulation within this city. We can only take an initial step tonight, and by law, that initial step can only last for 45 days. Prior to that 45 days, we can extend the ordinance for up to a full 1 year. In other words, an additional 10 months and 15 days, so that 1 year from today, effectively, the moratorium would be in place. So I just want to emphasize that tonight is really a first step. It's the start of a process, the temporary process. We'd have to be back here probably in late December if you adopt an ordinance tonight to consider the extension of the ordinance. But then there would have to be a permanent process that would also start, which is the idea that maybe within a year, or certainly within 2 years, we would have a permanent ordinance that would go to the Planning Commission, may have the required CEQA review, and then ultimately would be presented to the council. So it's somewhat complicated, and I understand folks might be asking, is this the final say, and why is it not the final say tonight? And the reason is that's how state law works. So in any event, I'm happy to answer any questions.
I had a question.
Okay.
I thought there was a 2-year a possibility of 2 years, right? Then you would have it extend another year if necessary.
The way it works is there's 2 extensions. So the first adoption of the ordinance gives you 45 days. Then you have 10 months and 15 days from the end of that 45th day, which brings you to 1 year. And then at the 1 year mark, you can extend for an additional year. So you get 2 full years. And there's 2 extensions. So it's essentially you would do 3 adoptions. You do the adoption tonight, the second adoption within 45 days, and then the third adoption within a year, and you have 2 years.
And when I asked you some questions about the moratorium, my question, and the moratorium still seems a little confusing to me, and I think to others. Will it be possible, like, okay, we have the moratorium, and we have some project that does apply for a CUP, a conditional use permit. Can they proceed on to get licensed by the state? Would we be giving them permission within that first year in January, saying, yes, you can go on and continue into that conditional use permit?
Yes, if you opt for the regulatory option tonight, then those who apply for our conditional use permits could go to the state and then apply for the state license.
And would we only be stopping them because we kept extending it, if that's how it did, or the final product, I mean?
Well, again, if you adopt the ban ordinance, then, there's really no reason for them to go to the state, because the state would require them to have local authorization, which they would not have. So if you adopt a ban ordinance, you are effectively saying, we're not going to have these uses in our city, and so the state would not issue licenses in that
Right.
situation.
But the other one, they would.
If there's a regulatory version, or if there's nothing, in other words, if we're just silent on the
Yeah.
subject and we just say, we're not going to deal with this, then the state could
Yeah.
issue licenses in that situation.
Yeah, and that is the danger if we don't do something in 45 days and then extend it. Then if January happens and we don't have something, anything is possible.
And that's the reason why not only are you doing this tonight, but many other cities around the state are doing this. The state process started with the adoption of Proposition 64 around this time last year, and they have this January 1, 2018 magical date where they're supposed to be up and running, sales are supposed to be legal, they're supposed to start issuing the state licenses, and they are literally sprinting to do that. And many cities have been waiting to see what they're going to do because they want to, work intelligently within whatever framework the state creates. But the state has basically been required to, run a marathon at a sprint pace, which is what it's been doing. So a lot of cities like us tonight are looking at these urgency ordinances and just trying to adopt something so that we slow everything down and we can have some breathing room while the state goes forward with its process.
I have one more question. I had noticed something in reading the whereases, and I saw that there is a potential for studying and have reasonable time in which you can study the issues over this extension, and this is the second to last whereas, page 2. And just wonder why we hadn't sort of gone in that direction to create sort of more of a studying kind of situation, and didn't know if you had some
Well,
background on that.
Once this ordinance is adopted, I think it would be appropriate, and I assume it would be implied, but the council can certainly expressly direct the city attorney and the planning director to start the process for considering a permanent ordinance. And I think that would be prudent, and I think both Dave and I, realize we need to get going on that. But I've been watching the development, and there's just been a lot of gray areas until recently. The regulations are now, the state's starting to publish regulations, it's doing its own CEQA review, so we have a lot more now in November than we had, say, in March, or even June, or even September. We did do a few workshops, as the council knows, to kind of figure this out and talk about some of the fiscal impacts. But even there, as I've told the council previously, I still don't know what type of tax revenue we could generate, nor do I think we have any idea of what kind of grant money we could get if the state is supposed to be distributing grant money to the cities from the excise tax and cultivation tax it imposes at the state level. But I still think none of us have any real understanding of what kind of money that will actually mean. So there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered. I think there's more questions that have been answered now than there was before, but there's still a lot of gray areas.
Derek, question on the tax issue, and if we adopted a ban ordinance, does that preclude us from any distribution of any kind from the state?
Yes. Yeah, you can't, the state's only going to give money from the grant funding that is generated by the state licensing taxes to agencies, local agencies that actually allow marijuana uses. If we ban it, they're not giving any money to us.
So, and that applies to both excise tax and grant money?
Correct.
Okay.
And with the grant, with the excise tax, would we have a problem with the GAN limit if we proceed in that direction?
So the finance director has advised us on that previously. My latest discussions with her are that our GAN limit issue is maybe not as bad as it appeared to be previously. So I think, I'd have to let her give you the actual numbers on that, and I hope I'm not misstating conversations she and I have had, but I do believe we would have space, maybe not a whole lot of space. I mean, I think the city could bring in some money without triggering the GAN limit, but we're still close enough to the GAN limit that it's an issue.
Yeah,
But
sure.
Julie would have to
Yeah.
make the final call on that.
Sure.
I think the last time she mentioned that was about $400,000.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
When
what
you're
I
thinking
understand.
400,000 more in sales revenue and not affect the GAN limit. And the GAN limit is a limitation placed state law. Based on our population, we can only tax the people so much money. So right now, we're about $400,000 away from that limit. And I don't know, anything over that, we have to somehow return to the people, but I don't know what the mechanism is for that.
Reduce tax rates or changes in regulatory fees like wastewater bills and things like that.
Okay. Did you hear what Joe just said? Speak into the mic.
The GAN, I just happened to read that today. The GAN thing says that you have to get, if you exceed that limit, you have to return those funds in the form of reduced taxes or reduced rates in the fee structure that you gained that money. And you have to do it over a certain time period. I think it's 2 years.
Yes.
I have a question. I thought excise tax, separate from the sales tax. Excise tax on the industry does not affect the GAN limit. It's the sales tax that generates the revenue from the sales of the products or from that. I thought they were two separate. That was my understanding when Julie
Okay. And
explained that at the last meeting.
Yeah,
that
it
was
may
two
be, I mean,
separate
I
things.
really would have to defer to her on, what the specific
And-
proceeds of taxes would be that we would trigger the limit.
And that was how the county with Measure C was allowed to gain the amount of taxes recently because it was not toward the GAN limit. It was an excise tax on the industry, not,
That may
On
be
the
the
sales
case.
tax.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
okay.
Okay. Any other questions from the council?
I've got a whole list, but do you want to do
Yeah.
the public
It's
comment
up-
first, or what do you want to do?
What we'll do is, if you have any questions or comments now, you're free to make them, and then we'll open up to public comment, and then we'll bring it back for further discussion. So if anything you want to say now or later, it's up to you.
I'll go through my list first.
It's up to you,
Yeah, okay.
okay?
For Derek, laws what gives us the authority to pass laws that are in conflict with the federal statutes? The Schedule I drug prohibitions are fairly clear on the federal side. It puts our police in conflict with some of that stuff to some extent. What specifically gives us the authority to pass something less severe than the feds have in place?
I think on the face of federal and state law, there's still a conflict. Federal law very clearly says that marijuana is a Class I drug. State law now says it's legal. I would caveat that by saying under the old days when we had medical marijuana, when all we were dealing with was Proposition 215, we got around that by saying that we don't really legalize marijuana in California. We grant immunity to people who use for medical reasons, and we're deciding not to prosecute them. And that was how we got around the conflict between federal and state law, and I'm getting very technical. But on the face of federal and state law, we have a conflict now. The answer, though, is that, I think I've discussed with the council previously, is the chance of us, or really any city ever being prosecuted for this, are minimal, extremely minimal. So it's really the face of the law versus the practical reality that, the state isn't going to, the feds aren't going to come after the city of Angels Camp. Early in the beginning of the Trump administration, Attorney General Sessions did make indications that he wasn't on board with some of the state efforts to legalize marijuana. The Federal Department of Justice has not followed up with any guidances or any guidelines that implement his direction. Prior to the Trump administration, the Obama administration had started to move away from, it's a party line position that existed. So I guess the answer to that is, I don't think there's a theoretical conflict, but in my opinion, it's theoretical only. We're not, and the question is, if we don't regulate it somehow, are we going to, lose control? And that's really a policy question. So the answer is, technically the conflict is still on the books, but as a practical matter, it's never going to be an issue.
Derek, I've
Yes.
been reading about attorneys being guided by being careful about, I don't know, I just kind of worry about you saying it's not a problem, because I think that there are certain rules and restrictions for you to place federal law above state law. Yes.
Well, my duty is to advise, and I've done that. I mean, I think I've accurately summarized that federal law and state law still technically conflict, but that the chances of any prosecution or any action by the federal government against this city would be, in my opinion, nothing more than theoretical. I don't make policy. I can't decide what's best for the city. But if you adopt the ban ordinance, I can tell you that you are on solid legal grounds. If you adopt the regulate ordinance, I think that you still would be on solid legal grounds. I note that you are still following state law. And even though there may be a conflict between state and federal law, if you're acting in accordance with express state law, it clouds the issue of whether or not you're really doing something illegal under federal law or not. I mean, it's getting complicated. But I feel like I've discharged my duty by painting both sides of the picture and giving you the options.
Mm-hmm.
It's a policy choice for you, and it's a difficult policy choice. I don't envy you guys. It's actually easier to be over here than over there.
Yeah.
Derek, I have a question for
Yes.
you in regards to that, because Colorado has obviously has legalized marijuana use through its state for the past few years now. Do you know of any federal action against any cities within Colorado?
None yet. I will say that there's this thing, and I think we've talked about it, the Farr-Rohrabaugh Amendment, which was, I think, a rider of some sort added to the federal budget by former Congressman Farr, and I'm not sure if Rohrabaugh is still in Congress, but named after two California congressmen, and it only applied to medical marijuana, and it basically said that federal funds cannot be used to prosecute anyone who is using medical marijuana in accordance with their state's laws. And so the idea was that was a first step by Congress to sort of rein in the administration from adopting a strict interpretation of federal law. And again, it only applied to medical marijuana. It has not yet been extended to recreational marijuana use like Colorado, Washington, and now California. And it has to be reappropriated or re-added or reenacted each year. It was enacted in September. So I guess the answer I have is that there's some movement in Congress to deal with the federal-state conflict when it comes to states that legalize recreational use, but those steps are not completed yet. I would say that, in my opinion, and for whatever it's worth, within 10 years, I suspect that the federal-state conflict will go away. I suspect that Congress and a president, whoever that president is, will finally get around to addressing that. That seems to be the pattern. But again, I can only tell you what the law is today. I'm not good at predicting what will happen in the future.
I guess.
Joe, you had some more questions?
Go ahead. Well, can I finish this one, just a little tiny thing? I was just wondering, I think that you're saying that you're advising us from what you see and the future and projecting, but you're not really answering to the Constitution and Article 6, Section 2, and about the supremacy of federal law as far as principle goes.
Well, what I can tell you is that the supremacy clause of the Constitution, coupled with the federal drug laws, does prevail over state law. That's clear. What I am saying is that state laws now are expressly allowing for recreational use. I will say the Supreme Court precedent is not entirely settled on this subject. I think that if you go off of prior case law, you would say that there is a conflict, but there are constitutional lawyers who, just like somebody joked that you put 2 lawyers in a room and you get 3 opinions. So I'm not going to tell you that you can't find people who would try to argue that the conflict isn't there. It's a complicated issue. What I can say is that I believe that if you were to enact a regulatory ordinance, nothing bad would happen to the city, and you would possibly be able to get some of the benefits that are associated or alleged to be associated with marijuana uses. You would be able to get some control, you would be able to get some revenue. I'm not saying these are good things or bad things, I'm just saying these are things that other cities, considering the regulatory approach, have said that they want to have in their cities. So my point is that I don't see any risk of prosecution or any action by the federal government. If the federal government is going to take action, it's going to be against the state. And, if that action happens, then, we can watch the state and the federal government battle it out. But my view is that you have the authority to adopt a regulatory option. There is a conflict on the books between federal and state law. And the best I can tell you is that exists.
Okay.
And if ultimately you feel that you don't want to regulate because you want to respect the supremacy of federal law, that's an entirely valid position for you to take as council members.
Thank you.
Following up, in either ordinance with the 45-day follow-up, the conditions that exist that cause us to move to this urgency scenario, are they what's basically described in the 2nd and 3rd and 7th paragraph, the whereases, the safety issues in the community?
Yes.
So at the end of 45 days, we come together at a minimum and reattest to that. Is that
Yes.
the way that works?
Yes.
Those same set of issues?
Yes.
Okay. And then, with respect to personal use, is there, I don't see anything in the ordinance that specifies, regulatory activity in that regard. In other words, asking people to register their 6 plants. Am I understanding that correct?
Correct. There's not a permitting scheme for the plants.
So we're not regulating that in any way, but we outline a series of things that have to be in place. So anything that got enforced in that regard would be just related to outside circumstances. If the police got called to a noisy
Right.
party, made a discovery, that's the only time that kind of action would be followed up, or a citizen's complaint about odor or something like
Correct.
that.
Yeah, it would be treated as a code enforcement matter, and so code enforcement in this city, as it is in almost all cities, is referral-based. Code enforcement goes out when there's a complaint, makes an inspection, and so that's how we would detect violations, and then we would have the ability to cite, and in extreme situations, we'd have the ability to order abatement.
Okay. I'll let the floor here for the questions that I have for now.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions for now? I've got a couple just kind of bookkeeping things. The section 1 of the regulated ordinance, definition 1, it says the term cultivation, and it has included in there the creation of products involving marijuana. Should that be in there, or is that manufacturing?
Which one is it, Scott?
That would be the second line,
In
definitions
Section
A1.
Oh, number 2.
Section 1A1.
Oh, A1.
It talks about cultivation shall mean
Got it.
planting, growing, harvesting, drying, storage of, or creation of products involving. So that implies to me edibles and things that would fall under the manufacturing.
Well, but this, your cultivation here deals with personal, so the question is, do you want,
Or commercial.
or commercial, but I mean, yeah, so the question is, do you want to allow people, to create edibles in their houses, or do you want to just let them grow the plants indoors?
Well, under this ordinance, we're allowing it, we're banning it in section 1, and then we're allowing it later under
Well, you-
manufacturing in section 3.
You're banning cultivation altogether in outdoor, and then you're allowing indoor cultivation. So the cultivation definition only applies in section 1.
Okay. Okay. And then, let's see, there's a distinction in section 3, A1. There's a distinction for medical cannabis. If we pass these either ordinance, are we looking at allowing medical dispensaries? I'm sorry, it's section C. It's section 2, item C. And that's our current code, and it looks to me like we're still allowing medical marijuana dispensaries. Yeah.
The reason we're doing that is because we have adopted a permanent ordinance that allows medical marijuana dispensaries subject to the conditional use permit. It is my legal interpretation that we cannot effectively repeal an existing ordinance through a moratorium.
Got it.
So-
Okay. So that's something, though, if we were to go permanent with this, we could address that at that time.
Yes.
Got it, thank you. And let's see. You already answered my questions, why can we make this permanent tonight, so we're good there. Okay,
Scott, I was wondering something. I have some questions on the internal part, but should we just wait till later when we're going over it more specifically? Like you were bringing up some things, just some questions about like the in-house. and
you're
all that.
welcome to say things
Should
now
we-
or
now?
later, whatever you want to do.
I don't know. Let's see, let me,
Don't wait us too long, don't make us wait too
let
long.
me do it
okay?
now, I guess.
All
I
right.
don't know, I know everybody want to speak, and that's where I'm not sure if I should just, raise of hands, no. I was wondering, in section 1C1,
Which,
is section 1C1,
Which ordinance?
oh, this is in either one, because this is the in-house.
okay.
Okay. The cultivation of marijuana indoors is permitted use in any residential zoning district, provided the cultivation is only for the personal use of any residents who lawfully resides within the residence where the cultivation occurs. And later, we say that they can't grow it in the house. You can only grow it in an outdoor, I think, I'm
No,
interpreting
you
that
can't
right?
grow it in a kitchen, bathroom,
Well,
or
just-
bedroom.
Well, I was wondering about that, because then it also had, this is where I wanted to clarify, because I did notice that too, and I said, well, marijuana cultivation shall not occur, that's in G, in any kitchen, bathroom, or bedroom. That means it could be in the living room and in the dining
No,
room?
it can't be anywhere
Huh? What?
accessible by anybody under 18, it has to be behind a locked door.
Okay, so, but then that's what I was wondering, how come it could be lawfully resides within the residence? It sounds like the marijuana is being grown in the residence, is what I'm saying, versus behind the residence in a separate dwelling. See what I'm saying? Does it seem like that?
One point I may make is that the Proposition 64 does define a greenhouse as being indoors. So people can have structures in their backyard that are greenhouses, and that constitutes indoor growing, not outdoor growing. And so the reason why there are regulations of structures in the backyards of houses is just to make sure that, people don't go crazy with growing the plants in greenhouses, that they, take steps to shield and do other things. That's why there's a discussion of outdoor structures, even though technically the section is about indoor growing, because state law defines growing in an outdoor structure as indoor growing. It's a little weird.
Right, but it was just sounding like that people were growing in their house, in the residence.
They can.
You can.
Oh, you can? Okay, how does
Yes.
that work? Then I'm missing something.
Well, I'm not an expert in the subject, but basically, you have grow lights. There's actually, and again, you're going to probably think I know more than I do, but there's a whole series of like contraptions and equipment and structures that, ingenious people
You're right.
have created in light of, the growing rush. And, they have conventions and other things, but apparently there are contraptions you can put in a room that will have power cords, they'll have grow lights, they'll be fire, they'll meet all the fire codes, they'll have, water, they'll have, ways to water the plants and do all of that indoors. And so, yes, it's possible to grow 6 plants in a study or in a living room.
Oh, okay, so just not the kitchen, bathroom, bedroom of the residents can have marijuana growing?
Yeah.
This is crazy. And then, Beach said it was going to have this little outdoor thing, so it sounds a little confusing. I think you have to be 21 years of age to have recreational marijuana.
Correct.
So that's, I don't know if it comes up here, but and I didn't know about the use of products, e.g. CO2, butane, et cetera, if that's a full enough explanation of what isn't allowed in their homes, because those are inflammatory, ethanol and hexane and all that. So I don't know if we should just broaden that a little bit. Okay.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, so what we're going to do at this time now, we're going to go ahead and ask for public comment.
I'm sorry, but I asked Derek, and he said if Chief Fordall and if the fire chief wanted to speak, it would be better to do it at this time before the public. What do you think?
If you want staff to make discussions, you may want to do that now.
So I was wondering.
So I do know that our
Okay.
Councilmember Matilde did request, no, not Matilde, I'm sorry.
Herman.
Yeah, you requested that our police chief and our fire chief provide comments, so I believe they're here.
Yeah, they're here.
Okay. Neither is mandated to do that. If they'd like to step forward at this time, that'd be great.
Yeah.
It doesn't go tall enough.
All right, well, we'll make it work. Good evening, council members, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the opportunity. I think it's important.
You might want to hold the mic, Todd. There you go.
I appreciate the opportunity. This issue has caused more division and animosity than anything that I can recall in the last 20 years. I would like to emphasize that my position is one that is based on what my professional responsibilities and experiences are. My position has nothing to do with any personal biases or differences, and I hope that my professional experience and recommendations don't offend anyone. They should not. I have 3 points that I would like to make that I think are important and are relevant, and I tried to condense it as much as I could, so please bear with me. Number one, it's illegal under existing federal laws, has already been discussed. Why is that important to us? Local government is in place as a method to enable the sitting council to represent the citizens of Angels Camp in the best manner possible while ensuring that the operations of the city are within the realm of existing law. The Food and Drug Administration, a federal agency, has been granted the authority by the U.S. government to place all drugs in their respective classifications. Marijuana remains on the list of Schedule I controlled substances, the most severely restricted drugs that exist. Additionally, when council members are sworn in, they're required to swear an oath of office. For those that may not know, an oath of office is defined by Merriam-Webster as an official promise by a person who has been elected or appointed to a public office to fulfill the duties of the office according to the law. Secondary to the responsibility of upholding the law, council members are elected to represent the majority will of the people in the community on issues that affect the well-being of all city residents. Most of the citizens in Angels Camp have demonstrated repeatedly that they do not want Angels Camp involved in the commercial marijuana business. If the constituents that you represent feel that marijuana is not something that they want the city involved in, then their wishes should be respected. I feel that sometimes we forget our place as representatives working for and at the will of the people. Just as my badge is a symbol of public trust, your positions as council members are also based on the trust that your constituents have placed in you. I think it's a good thing and a healthy thing to take a step back and reflect on what our place in government really is. The city, like the state, has the option of enacting laws that are more restrictive than state or federal law. However, they are not given the authority by any legitimate government entity to ignore existing federal law. I've heard all the arguments related to the Cole Memo, Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, none of which change or affect the legal status of marijuana, which remains a Schedule I controlled substance under Title 21 of the United States Code. The states that have recently placed the legality of marijuana in the hands of the voters or whose legislative bodies have introduced bills to legalize marijuana have done so in direct violation of existing federal law. So far, the federal government hasn't acted unless someone can point to a statute that relinquishes federal control of marijuana to the hands of the state. The entire marijuana industry is nothing more than an exercise in willful disregard of federal law. Number two, second point, California officials, by their own admission, are not properly prepared to regulate this industry, nor do they have the required framework in place to correctly control and regulate what's going to happen. I've been reading about a two-pronged test the federal government is using to gauge the effectiveness of so-called state-regulated marijuana, and then deciding whether or not federal intervention is going to be necessary. The first prong is accountability or licensing, and then the second one is control and enforcement of the legal and the black market. Excuse me. Recent estimates put the marijuana production in California at around 16.5 million pounds annually. Of that number, approximately 2.5 million pounds are consumed within California, and the rest of it is shipped out of state. Some of those states don't recognize marijuana as a legal substance for any purpose or reason. These numbers are staggering. We're producing 6 times what is consumed and are shipping it out of states that at least statutorily have said they don't want it so that we can make money. Regarding controlling marijuana, some areas of the state, the combined state and local taxes on it are going to be as high as 45%, which pretty much guarantees the continuation of the already very lucrative black market. There is proposed legislation working its way through the system that would place CHP in control of policing the black market for marijuana in California. That bill will not be heard until sometime in January, and even if it passes, it will take months, if not years, for CHP to coordinate the intelligence with all the local law enforcement that is currently responsible for policing this problem. And this next point goes to, it's not really relevant to what we're talking about tonight, other than to show that the state is so ill-prepared for this, they don't even have regulations in place to govern or control personal use, let alone the commercial stuff we're talking about. The state has no regulations or statutes in place that offer law enforcement the ability to properly enforce laws pertaining to driving while impaired. By not having established limits on THC intoxication in place, the state of California has essentially taken the position that impaired driving is not a concern. As someone who routinely witnesses the effects of impaired driving, I'm here to tell you that it is a concern, and it's irresponsible and immoral for government to downplay this serious issue. The general population that does not use or abuse drugs should expect more from the government that supposedly represents them and is supposed to protect them from issues like this. The state is scrambling to get everything lined up and in order, but just as the county didn't expect 800 people to line up and pay for local permits, no one at the state really seems interested or concerned about the enormity of the problems ahead. The wait-and-see approach is by far the more prudent approach in respect to seeing how well and how quickly the state can get its affairs in order and avoid potential federal intervention. If the feds do end up involved and the city is participating in any fashion, it could be damaging to us. Ultimately, my sincere and genuine hope is that the Schedule I controlled substance issue is resolved through the proper legal methods that have been available for years. And finally, number 3, there are many issues related to young people and the message we're sending. Schools are already having to keep clean clothing on hand for students that live on marijuana plantations, that come to school stinking. Behavioral health issues are prevalent, including psychosis from withdrawals, children living gypsy lifestyles, traveling from marijuana grow to marijuana grow, self-medicating, sharing drugs, overdoses due to THC toxicity, additional counseling staff to deal with the plethora of issues and other problems. The manufacturing of edibles by the sheer nature of the products that are produced, the candies, the gummy bears, the cookies, and other marijuana-related products, which are marketed directly to young people, is disgusting and should be illegal in and of itself. We have enough issues trying to prevent our teens and young adults from falling into the abyss related to behavioral health problems. We do not need to support the opening of a facility that will directly contribute to creating more of those same issues. I mentioned the oath of office earlier. Most of us at the police department take it very seriously. We've already lost one long-time employee, in part because of the effects that this invasion has had on our way of life and the lack of strong leadership in place to address it. We as police officers and you as government officials have an obligation to uphold, support, and defend all the laws. We don't get to pick and choose which ones. I know of at least a couple more employees that will be resigning if this continued attack on our legal and moral responsibilities continues. And I plead with you, out of respect for the institution of government that we all represent, and in consideration of our roles as public servants and representatives, that the council abide by the law as it is currently written and stop the indifference to it that has become too common. Thank you.
Excuse me, Todd? Okay. A question? Amanda?
Yeah. If we go with the proposed ban that's in front of us, how does PD, as well as the fire department and the rest of staff, plan on enforcing this? With no money coming from Prop 64, with no revenue stream to provide to city staff to enforce, what is your solution to enforce this? Because with the financial aspect we are right now, we're down to bare bone PD. We're looking to closing staff office, fire. This is one more burden that we're asking you to enforce, yet we don't have the means to do so.
Well, my response to that would be that really nothing's changed because we've been facing those same issues for as long as I've been here, for 20 years that I've been here. So, I mean, it's not, no legitimate concerns, and I agree with you. I'm concerned about it too because what's happened, thanks to the county, is that there's been an influx of people that are here, that are doing this, whether they have permits or not, and there's been a huge increase in the black market just in our own geographic area here in the county. So it's not going to be an overnight solution. It's not going to be something we're going to solve tomorrow or next week or next month. It's going to be an ongoing battle that we're going to have to fight, and we'll just have to do the best that we can with what resources that we have and try and get as much help as we can if we need to.
And then with your comment on the federal law, our Constitution also allows for states to have their own commerce. That's how each state thrived. That's how states' rights were developed. So we didn't have to abide by federal law if we saw other means to bring revenue into our states individually. That's how LGBT rights have fought and gotten through the federal government. It's all started from our local growing up. So with that being said, if it's our state right to also generate commerce, how are we in conflict, other than the scheduling, to look into this as a possibility in an innovative way to generate revenue within our own local control?
Those are all good questions, and I'm not a constitutional scholar, and I don't claim to be. I'm a dumb cop, okay? I mean, I admit that openly. However, I also operate in a world that's pretty much black and white, and with the existing conflict between the Federal Controlled Substance Act and what the states are doing, which has been addressed and even agreed upon by our city attorney, I just don't feel comfortable taking a position for me to say that I'm okay with it, because I'm not. I mean, that's from a professional standpoint, that's where I'm at because of the conflict. As I stated, if that conflict can get resolved somehow through the legal means that are available for those that want to try and rectify that, that would be fine. Then there would be no conflict anymore. So until that gets resolved, I have to, from a professional standpoint, I have to take the position that I do. At least that's how I feel I do.
I have a couple of questions for you, or maybe just one, I don't know. You had mentioned the sales of edibles in cookies and candy-like form. To the best of my knowledge, I've never been in a dispensary, but I think that you have to be of a specific age, either 18 or 21, I'm not quite sure, in order to get into a dispensary. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but I think that you have to also, for a medicinal dispensary, I'm not talking about recreational. And then I look at this also just like, you've got cigarettes and alcohol and et cetera for all the kids. Kids are hopefully not getting them, but they are getting all of that. So what is the regulation on entering an actual dispensary? Do we have an age limit?
There's an age limit. However, the issue that I'm trying to make is that regardless of what the age limit is, I mean, we all know that you have to be 21 to buy alcohol. Kids still get it.
Exactly.
And the problem that I have with what's being done is, even though they're not advertising it yet on TV or anything like that, it's pretty obvious to me who their target audience is when they're marketing candies and things like that that look like, candy that you would buy in a store that's normal candy. That's my big concern with it. I think probably most of us would agree that if the tobacco industry or the alcohol industry attempted to market products like that, there'd be a huge uproar, be a big issue with that. I mean, hopefully.
Yeah, and they already did, and yeah.
Hopefully things will change as things progress, and that won't become, that won't be an ongoing issue. But right now, as it stands, there's just a lot of products out there that are very obviously, in my opinion anyway, my professional opinion, geared toward younger people that is inappropriate.
I have one. I know that in studying Colorado, the middle schoolers have had the greatest increase of use, more than even high school students. So it's very attractive.
Okay.
And Chief Fordall, in regards to a DUI, because everybody thinks driving under the influence is only alcohol, but we're talking driving under the influence is anything that is mind-altering, correct? I mean, it could be a prescription drug that you are supposed to take, but you're not supposed to. Yeah, so when you're looking at, say you pull someone over and obviously you can smell marijuana, it's like you can use your best judgment in regards to a DUI issuing a ticket or arrest or whatever it is, correct?
Yes, we have, and we do. The problem, and what I was trying to point out, is that the state, in their haste to get this stuff legal, I mean, I don't know the history of alcohol. I don't know when they came up. I know that since I've been a cop, there's always been a presumptive limit that was acceptable, per the law. So if you're under When I started out, it was .10, and then it's gone down to .08. So over the years, it's adjusted and it's changed. As it stands right now, my concern is that they've made the substance legal and readily available now, and there is no presumptive limit that where someone would be deemed legally intoxicated by the law. We've had to spend, fortunately we had grant funding to do it, but we've had to send several officers in our department to specialized drug recognition expert training so that they can make those arrests, because without that expertise and that additional training as it stands right now, a regular officer who doesn't have that specialized training would be hard-pressed to make those determinations, but fortunately, we do have staff that has had that training, some of it, some staff, I should say. So we're in pretty good shape there. It needs to be, I'm sure over the years, as things progress, things will change, and they will come up with a presumptive limit like they already have in Colorado, to where if you exceed a certain amount of THC in your system, then you're considered legally impaired. So.
Okay, yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
it does, thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
I think we're here from our fire chief.
Fire chief?
Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. My name is John Warbaugh. If you don't know me, and I'm the fire chief of Angels Camp. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. I want to make sure everybody knows I'm not taking a position on marijuana one way or the other, but what I want to talk about is what I'm supposed to do as the fire chief. It is my job to protect life, property, and the environment. And it's my job to try to make Angels Camp the safest place to live, visit, vacation, recreate. And my concern is, and I don't believe there's anything we can do about it, but I've been in public safety for 34 years. I worked for a big city fire department. I was on the special operations team and the hazmat team. I probably ran multiple fires related to indoor grows. And that's the concern that I have for our city. That's the biggest concern I have. I mean, I'd rather have you grow 6 plants outside. I know the public doesn't want that, but that's safer for everybody. When you start growing marijuana inside, there's numerous things that happen. You have, and since we're not going to require a permit or be able to really go in and regulate or enforce it, what's going to happen? People want to get the best bang for their buck. They want to grow as much plants as they can, as fast as they can to keep growing those 6 plants. So what happens a lot is we have multiple electrical problems inside those houses because people don't come in normally and get a general contractor to wire everything up right. So they overload their electrical system or do stuff that's not within code. And since we don't have a mechanism for regulating that, that scares me. It's been proven that in places where indoor grows have been approved, that the structure fire rate goes up by 30%. So and I've probably been on 100 of these in the city that I work for, a big city in the Bay Area, and almost every time it came down to electrical issues. And it does concern me that in our city where our homes, we have zero clearance sometimes, you're right next to each other. And so my biggest concern is for the structure fire potential. And if we move ahead with indoor grows, I'd like to have some way that we can regulate that a little bit, or at least be able to, if there's a violation that's seen, that there's a very stiff penalty for that. So it's not like, oh, $50 fine or a citation. That should be really big. And then also, everything that goes along with the indoor grow, you have access by people inside the house, so that's a safety concern for me if it's not done right. Again, we're probably not going to be out there enforcing it. We don't have the people to do that. It's not set up that way right now. And then all the possible chemicals that could be wasted that's going to go into our water drainage systems and into the creeks. So my biggest concern is on indoor grows is for fire, and I just want the city council to understand that structure fires will go up when this starts. It's just going to be a fact, and that's really what I have right now. Any questions?
I have one for you,
Sure.
but I think Linda does too, so I'll let her start and we'll work down the line.
What?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Do you want to, Amanda?
I said it looked like you had a question too, so we'll start with you and work down the
Oh,
line.
okay, I got it. All right. So you would prefer a permit, requiring a permit or something?
Well, I'm not sure if that can be done through the way the laws is, but, I mean,
I think so.
my thing would be that there has to be a way, I mean, people don't want to know, or the people don't want you to know they're doing whatever, but my concern is just for all the work that's going to be done to do their plants inside their house. You know, I know it says in the ordinance that it has to be done up to code and building code, but no one's going to be checking that.
Yeah.
So that's the concern. So it says that, but unless the police chief or one of his employees, or we go on a call and see something, it's not going to be brought to anybody's attention. And so, I mean, that's just, I can tell you, I've been to fires in an indoor grow of even 6 plants, and there was many issues. We couldn't shut off the electricity because they had wired it somewhere else to make sure they didn't have to pay for the electricity. I mean, and it's not like the house on fire, I'm trying to turn the electrical power off and it doesn't go off. It's like, okay, this is interesting. But,
Yeah.
you know, it'd just be nice to have some way to make sure that if they're going to do it, that everything's up to code inside the place. And then if we find something that's illegal, that it's enforced, you know, with a stiff penalty. Because if it's a $50 fine or a citation or please don't do that again, they're just going to continue to do it. And then you're going to have more fires. And we will have fires. I mean, that's just going to be the fact.
So I just wanted to ask Derek, we're able to do some permitting or licensing, different things, aren't there something of those things we can do?
In my opinion, you know, we're trying to get control of the situation. I mean, right now, the situation our fire chief describes exists. You know, we have no control. People can already grow unregulated 6 plants. So because this is a 45-day ordinance, I don't know that we would be able to have a permitting scheme up and running with a fee structure in place. So I think that's probably something that should be part of the permanent ordinance that we develop as we get this moratorium, and this would be looked at as a first step. You know, I agree with the chief that we have some limitations in that basically we're a referral-based city at this point, so the conditions he talks about would have to be brought to our attention through code enforcement, through a fire, through PD. But getting a permitting scheme up and running in 45 days is just not realistic.
But if we have an extension, we could ongoing do
Yes.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I just had one other question. Are you concerned about the volatile extraction that would go on in manufacturing if we had the volatile?
In a true manufacturing plant where someone's not doing butane hash oil at their house or stuff like that, I think the manufacturing facilities will be extremely regulated by the state. And personally, I wouldn't be concerned about that. They're going to have to go through state, they're going to have to go through city building code, they're going to have to get a fire inspection and those kind of things. Not saying that after we leave, they might do something different. But I can tell you that I am familiar with some of those in the city that I worked with, and the professional places were done like a clean room for chemical facilities. They were very nice, you know, and the fire department goes in there on a more regular basis. They go in for inspections, you know, you cold call them, you walk in and stuff like that. I'm not concerned, personally, as far as the safety of a manufacturing facility that would be regulated by the state and our building department and the fire department and the fire marshal, I'm not concerned about that, as far as safety goes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Amanda?
So what would you propose as a solution if the concern for fire hazard for indoor, other than permits? Because the percentage of the cities that I've seen that have enforced permit processing, they have yet, the last time I saw, have had any permit taken out. Because the public does not want to have said public service come into, so there's an issue, because then at this point, they're now doing it underground rather than following the permit process, because they're concerned of the, I guess, retaliation of public safety coming in to do such inspections.
Yeah, I understand that. I don't know if I know the answer to that. That'd be something to talk among the group and with the attorney on. You know, I just want to, if we're going to allow it, I just want it to be as safe as it could possibly be. I mean, if it was up to me, I know the community doesn't like, I'd rather have it outside. I've never seen a house burned down from having 6 plants outside, but I've seen 10 houses burned down from a house having 6 plants inside by it spreading.
Well, if it was easier access to have this, such as a delivery or a storefront, then that would resolve a lot of the issues, because at this point, then they're growing it indoor, their home, because they don't have a safe access avenue for the product.
And that's something for you, again, I just want to talk about the safety aspect.
No, I just want to show the correlation that there's also a caveat to whatever decision, that there's an unintended consequence, whether you in place a ban or whether you in place a permitting process.
I understand that.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Thanks, Chief.
All right.
Okay. I was wondering if we could get applause for him because he talked about wanting to regulate something that was inevitable. Just kidding. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open this up to public comment. And we're going to limit each speaker to one time, 3 minutes. And please make your comments relevant and try not to repeat what's already been said. Thank you.
Steve DePew, 576 Asa. The city attorney's left, but I found his statement to be extremely humorous when he said he would not like to be in your 5 people's position. I think it's very obvious how easy your decision should be. First of all, when this prop passed in this county, it only passed, we rejected it 57% by 43%. So that's the first statement. The second statement is I've never seen a public servant that had so much guts to tell the truth and common sense than the chief did tonight. It makes your job a lot easier. When the 2 young ladies on the right, I'm sure they had every good intention in the world when they applied to be appointed to the city council. But please remember what the chief said. You took an oath to abide by the majority of your constituents, and I found that your 2 questions were very naive about cookies and trying to prevent fires. So your job is extremely simple tonight. The majority wants this thing to be banned because all the questions that are being asked can't be answered, and even by the fire chief. There's so many unknowns, and then to pretend that the federal government is going to let this crazy state and Orange County ruin the Constitution is insane. So let's not fall into that trap.
My name is John Broder. I live at 1860 Finnegan Lane. I had a 2-part statement to make. The first part has been taken away from me because option 2 covers it. Put me strong in the option 2 category. The other part of my statement was, I'm wondering who is pushing for pot in our town except the pot industry. I have not heard them say anything about the supposed benefits of pot except that everybody's going to be rolling in money. The money that they make or that we collect in taxes will not cover the cost of health effects that will arrive or the crime that will come about or the anguish suffered from auto accidents and the mental health issues of our children. Prevention, not reaction. Be proactive, not reactive. Ban this stuff.
Thank you, Mayor. Mine is 2 minutes and 50 seconds, so I'm under the 3 minutes. But I do have a question. You brought something up that you gave to the council. Is that something that's in the packet? You were talking about some testing stuff. Earlier, the very first, when you first opened up, you read something about some processing?
No, that's something that I wrote in preparation for the meeting.
Okay, all right, because I was just curious if that was part of the packet. So And what I'm going to be referring to, because there's 3 different agendas, so mine has to specifically do with the CEQA findings. In paragraph 2 and 3 of the ordinance, the city attorney writes in part, marijuana for personal or commercial use has a potential to lead to nuisances and criminal activity. Admit an odor that can be noxious and interfere with quiet enjoyment of neighboring properties. Can be attractive to burglars. Can lead to violent confrontations. Cause an increase in crimes, including burglaries, robberies, violence, lead to illegal sales to minors, and cause large numbers of complaints of odors. Why on earth would the city council want to subject the residents to harm by proposing a marijuana testing facility within the city limits? Section 5, or the CEQA findings of the ordinance, states the city council has determined the testing facility is not subject to the California Environmental Quality Act because it is not a project. Therefore, it falls under the exempt administrative and maintenance clause. Section 5 further states that it is exempt from the act pursuant to California Code of Regulations, which states the activities regulated herein will not result in any direct or reasonably foreseeable indirect physical change in the environment. How has the council come to this conclusion? On what did you base this claim? And what are the specific regulations? The council also cites CEQA exemption under the common sense clause, as it can be seen with certainty that there is no possibility that the activity in question may have a significant impact on the environment. The council, with all good conscience, can't believe there's no significant impact to the environment. If so, please explain how you came to this determination. The first page of your own ordinance details the numerous instances of adverse secondary effects, including but not limited to large numbers of complaints of noxious odors related to storage of marijuana. Will they not be storing marijuana at the testing site? You don't cite any case studies, no documentation on marijuana testing facilities, no code compliance protocols, no mitigation procedure for violations, no mitigation for traffic impacts. As a matter of fact, I submit to you that you don't even know how much local and out-of-town vehicle traffic will impact the city at this testing facility.
Time.
Okay, well, I did have to ask a question earlier, so I have 1 sentence left to go, if you would permit me to do so?
Go.
Thanks.
Finish.
I appreciate it. I appreciate the time. The common sense approach I encourage the council to take to protect the residents from nuisances and increased criminal activity such as burglaries, robberies, violent confrontations, and cause large amounts of complaints of noxious odors is to vote no on Ordinance 480 as it is written, banning any and all marijuana manufacturing and testing facilities within the City of Angels.
David White, Angel Oaks, Angels Camp. I'll be as brief as I can. I want to support some of the things that people may not know because you don't get, like me, retired. I spend time on the computer and I see this stuff. In the last 4 days of October, the Sheriff's Office confiscated and destroyed 500 plants and 2,000 pounds of ready prepared for sale marijuana. In addition, they confiscated weapons and ammunition. In Amador, we had a standoff. The county of Amador and the county of Calaveras, with the SWAT team from Amador, had to surround a house where an armed felon...
Excuse me. Would you please address the council?
I'm sorry?
It's proper to address the council and not the audience.
I'm sorry?
It's proper to address the council and not the audience.
Okay. All right.
Okay, thank you.
So we got the SWAT team, 2 sheriff's departments, armed situation. Robbery at gunpoint in Calaveras County. Stealing cars, marijuana, and weapons from one house. Calaveras County, 4 people arrested, and these aren't children, these are 47, 52-year-olds from as far away of Nebraska. They're down here, and they are having weapons and ammunition, and one guy actually wearing a bulletproof vest. And then let's think about our Angels Camp. Angels Camp, convicted felon. We have ammunition, false registered guns, and we have drugs in our schools already. It's here. And we need to stamp it out. And that's what I wanted to make sure everybody doesn't get a chance to filter through the Sheriff's Department. But I want to end by saying 2 things. I smell you sniffing taxes. I have a son-in-law who's a fire captain on CAL FIRE. They have to attend during the year more than several fires out in outer regions around our city because they're overloading the power supplies that are available. I also would like to ask you to consider this. Now we've got guns, ammunition, and armor on the people who are here from outside our community and fighting over drugs and everything else. Which one of you is going to be the first one to have to stand up and visit a family of a police officer from Angels Camp who got shot by some stupid felon over cannabis?
Thank you. This is Lori White from Angel Oaks. Mayor, council members, I know that you're trying to do the best that you can do for the city, but what I'm hearing here tonight from some of the things that you have been saying is the concern is about money. Money that we don't have enough to pay the police department and the fire department as it is. The budget is overdrawn. And we're worried about that. Mr. Mayor, you even said that there was something that came up that would allow money to be brought back to the citizens. Well, I'm not interested in you bringing back any more money to me. I'm interested in a full ban on marijuana in the city limits of Angels Camp. Whatever it takes, that's what we need to do. I know, moving back to California, we doubled our property taxes. But if it takes you taxing me more because we don't have enough money to run this city, although I have to wonder how that is, I think that we need to do whatever we need to do without bringing marijuana to our city. Veronica, when you asked about 18-year-olds, you have to be 18-year-old to go in and buy these edible marijuana things. I can tell you from my previous law enforcement experience, those people get kids to sell to kids in the elementary schools, in the high schools, in the middle schools. It just happens. They don't care about having to be 18 years old. And there are kids in our elementary schools today that are already getting marijuana. If we bring it into our city, it's just going to make it that more easy for them to get it. And I hope and I trust that our city council will do the right thing and ban this for good. Let us worry about the finances some other way.
Judy Axman, 255 El Dorado Court in Angels Camp. I propose a ban on anything to do with marijuana in our city. This proposed moratorium would allow conditional use permits, basically begin the process to allow a business to test marijuana as well as manufacture and distribute it. This is allowing the camel's nose in the tent. Before long, the whole camel's going to be in. This will be detrimental to our city. I don't know why you city council members are in such a hurry to push this agenda forward. Why don't you just wait and see how other cities handle similar conditions and effects to the community? If it's all about money, then let's consider alternative ways to raise money. If you've read the 60-page federal document on the effects of marijuana in Colorado, you would ask the question, why would anyone approve this measure to introduce marijuana into our community? Statistics don't lie. There's an increase in crime, increase in adolescent use and possession of marijuana, increase in absentee rates in schools, increase in drug-related accidents related to marijuana, increased death from car accidents. Are you prepared to hear stories from families losing a child or a parent because you allowed this drug to be introduced here? Are you going to sit there and say that it won't affect us because we already have it here? Well, you better search your conscience and good judgment and turn down this moratorium. Our property values are at risk, our air quality is at risk, our water supply is at risk, our quality of life is at risk here in Angels Camp. More and more people will be moving away, and you'll be bringing a different element here, and not the most desirable ones either. Scott, at the last meeting, you said that with all the money that would be generated by allowing the testing, manufacturing, and distribution of marijuana, that we could use some of this money to teach our kids about the dangers of marijuana. Now, how ridiculous does that sound? It's like closing the barn after the horses are out. Do you think the kids will pay any attention to this education when we, the adults in the room, are allowing it to be brought into Angels Camp? The citizens of Angels Camp sent a clear message last year when they voted to ban marijuana here. You, the city council, as it's been stated by the chief, are to represent the citizens of this city, not your own personal interests. And the only clear answer here is to vote for a ban.
Mayor, council people. My wife and I moved here over 40 years ago in our early 20s to start a business from scratch. We left the valley with much better employment opportunities to relocate to Calaveras County because we wanted a different and better lifestyle for ourselves and our children. We have raised 3 children here. They went to elementary, high school here. They spent their childhood playing in these hills, hiking and camping in these mountains, boating and swimming in our New Maloney's Lake. They learned to ski at Bear Valley. They raised animals in 4-H. Most of their friends are children of other local families, and they had this same childhood. After high school, many of them headed off to bigger cities to further their education, but some stayed. They didn't want to leave, and they began their careers here. Many of the grown children that initially left are now returning. They are not returning home to Calaveras County or to Angels Camp because they can get higher wages or because there's more employment opportunity here. We know that's not an accurate fact. These grown children are returning with their families because they want the lifestyle that living up here will hopefully provide them. They have had these childhood memories and values deeply engraved in them, and they want those for their children. They're willing to make sacrifices to live up here because of their great desire to provide their same experience for their children. Many of you that are serving on this present board, too, have chosen to live up here for similar reasons. Think back and recall why you chose to live here. These grown children that I am talking about, who have since returned to our county, now work and serve in our small community. They are teachers in our schools, nurses, and personnel in our medical fields. They are firefighters. They are law enforcement officers. Those that stayed may be ranchers, construction workers, retail merchants, but they stayed and endured tough times. It was not because of the money, it was because of the lifestyle and because of the special place that Calaveras County is. Friends, family, and tourists all love Calaveras County. In our home, we personally have a daughter and a son-in-law, both of whom grew up here and have now returned to teach in the county. They made lifestyle decisions when they started having their own children, and they decided Calaveras County, and more specifically Angels Camp, is where they wanted to raise them. We understand that the city needs more revenue, but need does not necessarily justify the means. Our county and its supervisors have a huge mess on our hands over a scenario very similar to the one you are facing. Let's not repeat this mistake. The majority of the people of the city, 54%, have shared by vote with you what they want you to do. And as their representatives, we encourage you to follow their wishes. Getting back to physical matters, many of us know more revenue is coming down the line for the City of Angels Camp. The economic rebound has finally begun to impact Calaveras County. Our local business is a construction-related field, and our business is finally gaining speed again. We have talked with many other local Angels Camp business owners, and they say that same thing. Calaveras Lumber, Middleton's, Angels Food Market. I can't help but feel that we're taking the easy way out. It's like raising teenagers. You can make the easy decisions and pay the rest of your lives for making those, or we can make the hard decisions that we need to make so that we don't pay for this decision for the rest of our lives.
Craig Whitty, Miwok. I'm a resident of Angels Camp and a retired lieutenant from the California Highway Patrol. During my tenure with the California Highway Patrol, I was trained as a drug recognition expert by the National Highway Safety Administration. I was also an area commander, and I was responsible for an annual budget of just over $10 million. I believe I have an understanding of your budget concerns as well as the concerns of these citizens in regards to the potential harm a manufacturing facility would cause in this small town. In reviewing your regulatory ordinance, I have grave concerns about manufacturing especially. Let me address some of those. Before you make your decision on this regulatory ordinance, you should look at from a two-pronged approach. Is manufacturing of edible marijuana morally right, and is it economically sound policy? I hope all of you found time to review the 60-page Colorado report you were provided. I think it's interesting to note that of April 2017, 90% of Colorado municipalities had ordinances in place regulating marijuana. 69 allow it, but 168 now ban it. Let me briefly cover some of the reasons why. 5 million edibles were produced in Colorado. That's 45% of the pot market. In 2016, that edible market went up to $1 billion industry. What they've found is, in several studies, the growth of the medical or the marijuana edible industry is a primary factor in increased rate of marijuana overdoses and higher addiction rates in Colorado. This is why Colorado is now adding new regulations to the edible industry. Since legalization of recreational marijuana, calls to Colorado Poison Control Center for marijuana exposures are up 155%. High school dropout rates are up. These people are not leaving school to find employment, they're leaving school to get high. These people are a burden on our social services and will be for the rest of their lives. Teachers and faculty report grammar school children coming to school high. 1 out of every 3 high school juniors and seniors admit to using marijuana. Marijuana-related emergency room visits for tourists have doubled. A study from 2009 to 2014, Penrose Hospital lost $20 million in uncollected charges. A study covering that time period showed a 275% increase in marijuana-related emergency room visits and a 192% increase in patients unable to pay their emergency room charges. Dr. He from Duke University wrote, "The use of cannabis is associated with adverse physical and mental health outcomes." If you would please take the time to read the rest of the Colorado story, I think you'll see that it's a horror story. So please, when you're reviewing this, do like 168 other municipalities in Colorado have done and ban marijuana, please.
Good evening. Bob Middleton, Live Oak Drive, also owner of Middleton's Mark Twain Center. I have a couple of concerns on your ordinance. In the ordinance, it does say nowhere where it can be grown, manufactured, or processed. Problem with that is, it needs to be in the industrial zone. We have an industrial zone in our general plan. When we made, and I was on the planning commission at the time, the 2020 general plan, we put industrial in for manufacturing. Manufacturing does not need to be in suburban commercial area. Right now, you're proposed, and that's granted, we're not supposed to talk about it, but it's out there already, is in suburban commercial zone. Needs to be an industrial zone if you're going to have it. I know the land needs to be in compliance with all your city ordinances and all the city laws. I know it's inspected by that. My question is, how are you going to collect taxes? I know how I collect sales taxes and how I pay the state of California. How do you collect tax on distribution? There's an excise tax. How do you collect it? Who audited it? Do you have to hire an auditor to go out and audit the books for that manufacturing and laboratory and distribution facility? Nowhere there does it say that in your new ordinance, your proposed ordinance. I'm also worried about security. If you put this anywhere else other than in the industrial zone, which is not developed, all the businesses are going to have additional security via cameras, guards, whatever, because we're all exposed to more liability for burglaries and other things. What the proposed one is right now, you have a dentist with drugs, you have a Verizon cell phone, you have my business, you have the grocery store business, you have other business going to be affected by it. That's going to be a security issue because these people do not know where the lab's going to be or the distribution area is going to be. On the tax, GAN, in the CPU right now, you're going to say you're going to raise up 1.6 to 2.4 million dollars. You're telling me it's capped at 400,000. 5 times more you're going to collect than what the GAN mode lets you go. So what's that going to do with that other money? You're going to give it back to us, you're going to give it back to the processor. You're going to give it back to the processor. The other part of it is how you're going to regulate personal use. I'm not sure how that works on the state law, but I know it should be, you're letting 21-year-old kids buy it, but you're only letting 18-year-old kids deliver it. And the ordinance says 18 years old can deliver it to the distribution area. The law says 21 for buying it. That's a total conflict. Also, you have a problem with that. How can you, what do you do with it? You can consume it in your house, but I can't drink a beer on the street, but people can smoke a joint on the street.
No, they can't.
I don't understand that part. Yes, they can. I've seen it coming out of cars. People smoking a joint in their cars, roll the window out, all the smoke comes out. I know, Todd, that's the only way the police force can really enforce it. It happened the other day at Mike's Pizza. The other part of it is the smell. I've already had people tell me if that facility goes in above my shopping center, they'll never step foot in my shopping center again or anything about it. So this food for thought. It needs to go in the industrial zone if you're going to do it. Otherwise, go for the ban.
Christy Reisman, Finnegan Lane, Angels Camp. I appreciate the fact that the City Council is looking for ways to increase revenue to the city, but getting addicted to drug money is not the way to do it. I urge you to ban all marijuana activity in our city because the danger is too great and there are far too many unknowns to risk this. This is Malcursa. It's 166 pages long. This legislation is far too complicated and the potential ramifications far too damaging for any city to plunge forward unless every single city employee, every planning commissioner, and every council member who's responsible for promulgating regulations and practice of it is well-versed on every facet of this regulation. Have all of you read all 166 pages of this? Show of hands? Anybody read it, seen it, anything? No? Okay. There are a few reasons that I don't think our city knows enough about Malcursa to do anything other than ban it. The Regulate Draft Ordinance states that non-medical marijuana can be delivered by 18-year-olds to 18-year-olds, but Section 26140A3 of the Business and Professions Code states that Cannabis A licensees shall not employ or retain persons under the age of 21, and that one must be over 21 to use non-medical marijuana. That's on page 15 and page 69 of Malcursa if you want to read it yourself. The Regulate Draft Ordinance has no provision for any fees or local taxation. Do you think you'll be able to get a chunk of the excise tax being collected by the state? The list of beneficiaries of this money starts on page 152 and goes on for 7 pages. But it's earmarked for state agencies and then other agencies like public health or behavioral health that the City of Angels Camp doesn't even have. Previous discussions indicated that you believe allowing labs and manufacturing will allow us to retain or hire more police officers. But did anyone read page 159? 20% of the excise tax collected will be deposited to the state and local government law enforcement account. This is section 34019 of the Revenue and Taxation Code, for making grants to local governments to assist with law enforcement, fire protection, and other local programs addressing public health and safety associated with the implementation of the Control, Regulate, and Tax Adult Use of Marijuana Act. But the board shall not make any grants to local governments which have banned the cultivation or retail sale of cannabis or cannabis products. You're not getting any money. So if you're not allowing cultivation and retail sales, which we're not, you don't get any law enforcement money at all. The City of Angels Camp hasn't passed an actual taxation ordinance. So if you pass the regulate ordinance, then we get the danger, the stink, the crime, and the city won't get 1 penny to pay for any of it. So please ban it, ban it.
Penny Jassid, Greenhorn Creek. Our town has been and continues to be known for the Calaveras frog jump. Putting this proposed business in this town will change that forever. Who in their right mind would ever consider doing that? Most, but not all, of this council is only thinking of the potential revenue that is estimated, but not guaranteed. Yes, we need new sources of revenue, but not in this manner. Why aren't you, the council, the planning commission, and whoever else can find the legal means of forcing the owners of those current buildings which are unsightly, ignored, and against all codes downtown and are embarrassing, restore them to attract new businesses? I feel that the time and energy you are spending on this one awful business should be directed to more family-orientated businesses. It appears most of the council has their own personal agenda on this matter and couldn't care less what the citizens want for this town. And as previously stated by many already, I think some of you still need to read the disastrous results of the laws in Colorado. It is a nightmare and a plain disaster. I can give just one example of a personal agenda on this matter. It is illegal to drive under the influence of any alcohol or drugs. So what makes it okay or morally okay for any council member to govern the city while being under the influence and growing their own supply? What happened to lead by example? It would be interesting to know if any other reason but money would want this type of business in this town. If there is, please enlighten us. Thank you.
Hi, Dave Radford, 1233 Capello Drive, Angels Camp. Rather than repeat a lot of what's already been said, I want to educate the council and the city attorney a little bit. Based on my 27 years as a police officer, followed by 13 years as a prosecutor, there is absolutely no legal authority anywhere that allows states to ignore federal law. There's none. I don't think we got a clear answer from the city attorney when he answered that question. There's none. You've heard all about Colorado. Let me give you another tidbit about Colorado. Since Colorado legalized, quote, legalized marijuana, their marijuana-related traffic fatalities have gone up 15%. Washington State, similar numbers, 16%. Traffic fatalities related to marijuana, period. Colorado Highway Patrol did a study after the legalization happened there, and they started testing every single person that was arrested for DUI for THC, in addition to alcohol or other drugs, whatever. And they found out that in a 2-year period, 77%, 77, let that sink in, 77% of the DUI drivers out there had THC in their system. You can look up that study at the Colorado Highway Patrol's website. They're pretty proud of it. Based on my background, I've always had an old saying that if you don't give up the streets, you never have to take them back. Allowing any kind of marijuana activity in Angels Camp is the first step in giving up the streets. And I'd like to end with, if that manufacturing facility is built, I'll be on the phone to the Drug Enforcement Agency, which is the feds, by the way, every single day. And when they get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of complaints, they'll kick down the door with a search warrant, and I'll be there cheering. Thank you.
My name is Jack Axman. I live at 255 Eldorado Court in Angels Camp. I have a hard time speaking, so I'm going to let my wife.
Jack wrote this, so I will read it. About 20 years ago, my daughter graduated from the University at Irvine. A few years later, she was sitting by the pool in Palm Springs when a friend came by and they decided to party in Baja. They left the party around midnight and started driving home. They had a good time and were feeling good from the marijuana. The driver ran off the road, smashed head first into a boulder. My daughter was thrown through the windshield and smashed 3 ribs, was scalped by the broken glass. Her pelvis was broken in several places. An empty ambulance came by and picked her up and drove her back to hospital in San Diego. The doctor saved her life. She was in the hospital for several months, had 6 plastic surgeries, and was lucky to be alive. For the next 20 years, she was never the same. He went to her funeral about 4 years ago. All he has left are fond memories of the many good times he had with her. He will always remember her happy shouts when she arrived, or when he arrived from work, and she greeted him with a very happy daddy. He hopes you never will go through the sadness of losing a loved one at a very young age and waking up in the middle of the night feeling your daughter or son is sitting at the foot of your bed, and every night hearing that delightful voice saying, "Daddy." Marijuana is not worth the pain or temporary financial gain you think it might bring.
Good evening again, council and staff. My name is Jack Lynch at 600 Selkirk Ranch Road, Angels Camp. I stand tonight to speak to you against introducing any activity involving marijuana into our city. The council is to vote on allowing commercial manufacturing and testing of marijuana in Angels Camp, and effective immediately. Just 1 year ago this week, and with over 80% turnout of the registered voters of Angels Camp, our city voted against Prop 64, that's the recreational marijuana proposition, by a vote of 57% no and 43% yes, and that vote still stands. That's a very strong message for the council to consider tonight. The citizens whom we represent have voted a great big no on marijuana. In addition to this vote by the citizens, the past city council last year voted to ban all marijuana from the city. As an MIT graduate engineer with a lifelong experience in manufacturing and product testing, including direct experience with Cal OSHA and Cal EPA, I would like to speak to you about Section 3 of the proposed ordinance. This section discusses the manufacturing and testing activities, the proposed processes of extracting marijuana, the chemical, I emphasize chemical, synthesis of marijuana, or the combination of extraction and chemical synthesis of marijuana products. Without a question, an environmental report would be required by CEQA regulations in order to assess the possible environmental impact on the city of these proposed chemical uses, these manufacturing processes, and the manufacturing plant's activities. The fact that this ordinance does not call out for this environmental review in Section 5 CEQA findings is a major flaw. This needs to be corrected before the council can vote on the ordinance. As a suggestion to the council, you could vote to remove Section 3, manufacturing and testing services, and then vote and pass the rest of the ordinance, which reads fine to me. The council could then process the vote on manufacturing and testing as a separate item. I'd like to continue my comments, if I may. Thank you. The citizens' request and the council needs an explanation from our city attorney before the vote tonight why there is no environmental review requirement in the ordinance 480 for a chemical manufacturing and testing activity in the city. You, our council members, represent the citizens of the city, not the marijuana interests. Given the recent no vote of the citizens, the pass vote of the city council, and now a flawed proposed ordinance, we are expecting you to vote no on agenda item number 1 tonight and reject its provisions for manufacturing and testing. Thank you.
Denise Turco, Angels Camp. This ordinance is seriously flawed as it is written. Section 1 details the very specific restrictions already in place for cultivation of marijuana for personal or commercial non-medical purposes. There are no less than 14 separate items dictating to the private resident, including solid walls and a solid roof, lighting, solid fencing, proper ventilation, prohibited use of gas products. Again, these restrictions are already in place. Section 4 discusses the prohibitions related to deliveries of marijuana from dispensaries located outside city limits. There are no less than 8 detailed restrictions listed here, including time of day for delivery and the requirement that payment must be made by some means other than cash. Section 3, which would open the door for manufacturing and testing services, has no such prohibitions, not a single one. Will these facilities be allowed to operate at all hours? Will they be allowed to use gas products? What about form of payment? It is fact, cannabis-related businesses cannot open a legitimate bank account. So, will the manufacturing facility be allowed to operate on a cash basis? What trouble might that invite? In closing, I question why it was necessary to bury the very short section defining manufacturing and testing service in the numerous prohibitions related to the private party. What is the council hiding here?
Clea Lynch, 600 Selkirk Ranch Road. For the record and the council's consideration, I have an abstract from an opinion dated November 9th, found on the Calaveras Enterprise website, submitted by Alice Montgomery, a registered environmental assessor, University of San Francisco, and Environmental Protection Agency investigator, living in Arnold. Her comments are in direct response to this council's proposed marijuana testing, manufacturing, and distribution operation in Angels Camp. And I quote Ms. Montgomery, "Here's what we know. One, manufacturing is potentially very dangerous. While applicants may state that they're using CO2, they are in fact allowed to use butane, and likely would. This process is very simply explosive. Number two, because the state of California doesn't even have all the protocols rolled out yet, Angels Camp, through no fault of their own, may not have the resources to adequately administer, inspect, oversee, regulate, and enforce all that's required or should be required for these kinds of businesses. It's always better to be prepared than to play catch-up." And Ms. Montgomery continues, number three, we already know that money is not a valid justification. If Calaveras County can lend a lesson to the council, these businesses will more than likely cost Angels Camp more than they can provide. Her advice, rethink. And I can't help but wonder, what is it? Wonder why the council seems to know more than an EPA investigator does. I just can't understand that. In addition to Mrs. Montgomery's comments, as I read articles in our local newspapers involving marijuana and drug arrests, guns are nearly always involved. I'm not a gun owner, so if you approve this marijuana operation, I will have to consider how best to keep safe when going to the Hallmark store, Angels Market, Middleton's, our library, and all the other businesses in the area. I feel my only option will be to take my business elsewhere. I won't shop in the area, and possibly many others will feel that same way. If you approve this operation going forward, the message I see you sending is you're more interested in the marijuana industry and marijuana money than the safety of the citizens and any loyalty to the businesses that have been serving the community for generations. Without marijuana, there is no impact on public safety, quality of life, environmental issues, or property values. Public safety is your main responsibility. So no marijuana testing, no marijuana manufacturing, and no distribution operations in Angels Camp.
Good evening, Furman Brown, Properties in Angels Oaks. You've heard an awful lot of good speakers here today. I'm not going to say the same thing over again. But remember one thing. Life is really simple, man just screws it up. And I'll like to summarize what we can do today. The county put in an emergency ordinance to think about it and what are they going to do with it. I know a lot of you people today, as I see from the audience, you're thinking about maybe this emergency ordinance is the way to go and we'll test it. If the county would have banned it on first go around, we wouldn't have all the problems in the county today. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Gina Gonzalez. Enough people know my address. I have a target on my back. Can you see it? Anyway, I'm against marijuana in every aspect of it. I have a daughter in Mark Twain. I'm dealing with it with the kids that she goes to school with every day. And I want to look at Amanda. Amanda? Excuse me, Amanda. I want to look at you. I'm a mom. And I want to know why you think it's okay for us to raise money in this way. I don't think it's legitimate. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's right. I think it's scary. I think we should step back from this and reevaluate. We should look at what other people have learned the lessons from and we should stop and think twice. Thank you.
I guess I have the same problem Todd had. I'm Bert Soban. I live in Greenhorn Creek here in Angels Camp. And I, in the past, have spoken against any operation involving marijuana in the city, and I still hold that position. Several people today referenced a Colorado report that was 40 pages long. I just downloaded a October 2017 update of the legalization of marijuana in Colorado, the impact. It's full of all kinds of stuff that you should be aware of. Finally, I got two more things. One, a comment was made that, or implied that you can regulate this, and that'll solve the problem. Well, in October, 60 Minutes had a session on the opioid epidemic. And guess what? The very first thing out of the pharmaceutical companies and the distribution was, we can regulate it. And look where we're at. So do you think, really, honestly, that you can regulate marijuana in the city? I don't think so. Finally, Derek, or the city attorney, made a comment that the city is obligated to comply with state law. Well, Colorado legalized recreational marijuana and it has been implemented there for about a year. Over half of the counties in Colorado have banned all marijuana growth, consumption, and so forth. If I understand the initiatives in both Colorado and the state, California, they're very similar. So I don't see why the city can't ban even internal growth of marijuana for recreational purposes. That's all. Thank you.
Hi, guys, I came back.
That's against the rules.
Excuse
No,
me.
real quick, please.
Just, I want you to know,
I'm sorry.
appreciate you guys showing up.
I'm sorry, Mr. Pinella.
Actually, I allowed this once before, having a person come back a second time, and then I had to pay for it because everybody said, well, I want to do it too. All right. So thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
We're all here because we don't want it.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the public comment portion of the meeting, or of this issue, and bring it back to the dais for discussion and possible action.
Point of order, sir. I asked a question of the city attorney. I would like to have a response to it.
And I'd like to actually give a response to former Councilmember Lynch.
Okay, sure.
Because that's important before you begin your deliberations.
Okay, thank you.
And I appreciate former Councilmember Lynch's comments and concerns, and
Former mayor.
I understand, former mayor. Round of applause, please. Show some proper respect, folks. CEQA, so just so we're clear, if the council adopts the regulate version, what that means is all we're putting into place is an administrative apparatus that allows for that to happen. That action is what technically is under review by CEQA, and it is my determination that simply creating the apparatus is in and of itself not an action that triggers environmental concerns. When we approve, or if the council were to consider and approve a permit, then a CEQA review would have to be done. That would be a discretionary act under CEQA that would trigger an environmental review. Now, what level of review? Would it be a negative declaration? Would it be an EIR? Obviously, that would depend on the nature of the use. But at this point, all we are saying is that in the abstract, if you adopt the regulate version, these facilities would be eligible for approval with a conditional use permit. So that in and of itself does not trigger the need for more than just a negative declaration or an EIR. we would do an environmental review once we actually have the specifics of an application. Where would it be? How big would it be? What kind of chemicals would it use? What would its hours be? Where would things get trucked in? Where would things get trucked out? We don't have any of that. So I also note that in June, legislation, SB 94 was adopted that specifically says that a CEQA review is not necessary for a programmatic ordinance that adopts a process for consideration of marijuana land uses, so long as there is some discretionary review at the project level. So irrespective of the exemption findings, state law expressly says we do not have to do CEQA review. That was something that was very specifically negotiated when the legislature passed that cleanup legislation, as it's known, SB 94. So I appreciate the concerns. There is no requirement to do a negative declaration or an environmental impact report for this ordinance. I want to emphasize that CEQA review would be done at the project level.
If I may, Mayor, I'd like to respond, if I may.
I'm sorry.
I don't want to set that precedent, Jack, I'm sorry.
Okay, in CEQA,
Jack, I'm sorry, Mr., you cannot respond. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
The answer I've received is unacceptable. You are saying in your document, attorney, that there is no chance of any environmental impact of what's in this document. It's a chemical processing plant, and you are absolutely wrong, and based on Cal OSHA, Cal EPA, and my professional experience in manufacturing. You cannot say there is no chance of environmental
Jack, you made your
impact.
point. Thank you. Okay, let's bring this back for discussion. Veronica, do you have anything?
Listening to everybody's opinions and information, I've made lots of notes. I'm looking at this and would like to do a lot of considering in regards to the regulate. Everybody here that has spoken is not in favor of having any kind of marijuana whatsoever, not the testing lab, et cetera. I'm going to say that I've also had people talk to me personally who don't want to show up at these meetings because they don't want what they call pitchforks, pushed at them. You can't deny a conversation that I've had.
Order, please. Let's have this discussion.
It's like, there are other people with other opinions. I'm just saying that. Okay.
Do your job, represent the people.
Okay, well.
You all have had an opportunity to speak.
Yes.
Please control yourselves and allow us to discuss this.
As I've said, there's a lot of people that I have spoken with, and they are not wanting dispensaries, distribution centers. However, in the same breath, they're saying that they have seen the effects of medicinal cannabis in different forms that they or their friends have used with very positive results. And I also have to consider, how do you get those medicinal cannabis products? You have to have them tested. You want them to be pure, not looking at a bunch of molds or chemicals. I'm looking at the lab mostly. I don't think anybody wants cultivation here. That's not even a consideration, I think. The plants, the indoor grows, as opposed to what is considered an indoor grow with the greenhouse being outside. The fire chief spoke at length at that. Again, I don't know about, I'm really looking at the medicinal use. Deliveries being 18 and 21, having the conflicts there, that would have to be cleaned up. Personally, I'm looking at this and thinking that we have to do the 45 days and look at it and get it cleaned up before we even take a vote on this. That's my opinion.
Okay. People, remember your manners. Thank you. Amanda?
After hearing comments, I see that there need to be, I agree with Veronica, some cleanups that do have to happen. However, I want everyone to know that this has not been a light decision. I also represent those that also support regulation. And while they may not be here tonight in fear of exactly the outburst that you're currently doing, I still have an obligation to those constituents to voice this opinion. Having attended numerous meetings through the League of Cities, along with having hard talks with my peers in other cities across this region, I have heard the variety of issues other cities are having. I am thankful we have, and with a regulated ordinance, not reached those issues that they are currently having. I have also heard that some cities are wishing now that they had done more in respect to regulation and not a ban. I am in support of all businesses into this city. It is their money and investments, and if they are willing to come into our city and add jobs and revenue, I cannot be biased by saying no, yet allowing another development that has recently come in that I am not thrilled about. We need to remind ourselves the bigger picture of what this city needs, and it is the council's job to make sure that the constituents of this city are not burdened with more increased fees such as water rates, decreased city services, your fire department and PD, and increased liability for our employees, which is making our budget into the deficit that it is. Because simply the biases of an opinion. I will not be letting privilege of those more fortunate in this town to place pressure on those not as privileged to be hit with bias for simply trying to follow the state law. I am in support of regulation that provides a safe avenue for the city constituents, whether for recreational or medical use, access to legal cannabis. I am not in favor of more bureaucracy or privilege as an excuse to impose on personal rights that the state has set forth. I will be supporting this regulated ordinance with moderate changes because it set this city up to be ahead of the game and to keep this county, most importantly, the state from controlling. The more local control we have, the better handle we will be able to support ourselves and not rely on the state as well as have a means and a tool for city staff to properly enforce. I am not interested in kicking this can down the road any longer, and regulation is the answer.
Get your friends who love it to come here.
Joe?
We're done with the general questions and whatnot?
If you have any questions or comments, this is...
No questions. I think my general position is that the primary responsibility is to the will of the people. If I look at the issues related to the Prop 64 vote, the evidence here, I haven't had anybody come to me and speak in favor of any of this that was outside the industry. So I'm kind of in line with that. And then when I add on top of that, the fact that it does put our police in conflict with federal regulations at some level. That's my position.
Okay. Linda?
Well, I agree with Joe that the majority rules in our country, and it's a consent of the governed. And even if you look back in our history, there is so much going against everything that we're doing, even with the Constitution and taking an oath to defend and support it, and then to deny the right of the federal government to rule over the state. We would still have slavery in southern states, and we would still have no civil rights in certain southern states. So this is a very important concept and principle, and sometimes we have to look at principles and live, according to those principles in order to secure our safety, in our nation, and secure the principles that give us the freedom that we have. We will lose our freedom every time we give up following what has been determined by those in the past for us. Now, the majority vote is what we need to follow here, and I don't understand when you can say, okay, a few people want this, and therefore we are not going to follow the majority. Well, that's what our whole government is based on. I do not understand it. Now, here's another thing, is the sales tax. I brought up many times that we should look at a sales tax if necessary, the TOT, we could look at other revenues, and never did we proceed in that direction to compare. We could balance, okay, let's see what this has, well, then let's see with cannabis. No. So that showed me there was not a real fairness at looking at any other option but cannabis. That didn't make sense. Also, we have the normalizing that comes through when you have cannabis, and every time you allow something of marijuana in your city, and you normalize it, and that means that encourages people who would never have used it now to use it. You'll encourage youth because, hey, look what we have, this manufacturing side up here, we have, everything that, we have distribution, we have vans going in and out with cannabis in them. Oh, I guess it's okay. So that means now you've increased the number of people who are going to use marijuana who didn't use it before. And of those who use it, there'll be increased traffic accidents. You will have the people who are using it, psychosis that we have seen in going into the emergency room, that we know that it's a gateway drug for 10% or more of those people who now have added on and decided to use marijuana who didn't use it before. Okay, so, and they're even finding now with the dabbing and the vaping and all of this stuff, that can actually cause an OD now, even through marijuana, because of the purification, of that process. So if we normalize it, then I personally look at it this way. If someone I know or someone I don't know, if I hear about someone who is in a traffic accident because they would never have tried marijuana, but now they do, and they're in a traffic accident and die or hurt, if they end up psychotic like so many people that I knew in the past, because I was involved in, a situation in San Francisco back in the 60s, and I saw hundreds of people who went through the gateway drug situation, and my sister ended up institutionalized as a result of her using marijuana, which then led to LSD, and methamphetamine. So I personally, if I vote for this and said, yes, I would be for non-regulation, that I would be for regulating it, I would feel personally responsible for the people that I have seen and caused to end up in a situation where they're dead or psychotic or whatever, then I personally, so every single one of those who now do it, because I have normalized it in this city, I'm responsible for them. And you better think about that.
Okay, thank you, Linda.
But just one other thing is that we do have to vote tonight on something in order to start the 45-day process. So we have to either vote on a regulated option or the ban option, or we won't have the 45 days, so we really need to begin that.
If I may make a point of order, it's also a 4/5 vote is required.
It is.
A 4/5 vote for this ordinance is required.
For some ordinance to take effect on an urgency basis.
Right.
Interesting.
Yep.
Okay. My take on this is a little bit different and a lot the same than all four of the others. I personally believe that California state Prop 64 did pass, whether we like it or not, just like Colorado, just like Washington State. The problems that we're hearing from there, they're here. They're on our doorstep. A ban, an outright ban of everything, basically says that, yeah, we don't like it. Doesn't mean it's going to go away. It means it's still here. We will fight with our limited resources to do the best we can to keep our quality of life what it should be in Angels Camp. There will be no additional revenues. And, money is important. Our contrary with some of the things I heard tonight, our reserves are dwindling. We do have to address our city's expense budget. We have been doing that the last couple of years, and we've been doing it very diligently. There is a distinction that I make between, and I think this would be a good discussion topic, the distribution center and the manufacturing centers are strictly cannabis activities. They don't distribute or manufacture anything else other than cannabis. The deliveries, I look at that as a personal rights issue. If any of y'all want to order marijuana through the internet and you want delivered to your home, who's the city to tell you can't do what you want to do with your own private order? And also with the lab, the labs test soils, waters, other agricultural products. We have other businesses in town that are supporting the cannabis industry. We have hardware stores, we have electricians, plumbers, contractors, a number of people who have benefited from the cannabis industry, and we don't regulate or we don't ban them. So, how do we ban a business that's not solely cannabis activity? That's something that I'm wrestling with. So, I would support a ban on everything. I'd like to discuss just the labs, which requires a very small amount of marijuana at one time to test, and also I'd like to discuss the deliveries. Again, I think just because we live in the city of Angels Camp, we can't order something that we want. And again, I've got no dog in this fight. I don't smoke marijuana. It's not something that I deal with, but I do respect personal rights. I do know people who benefit from the creams, the lotions, the other types of marijuana. I've seen the benefits to a lot of people that need it, and so I would not want to prohibit them from being able to have it delivered to their home if that's legal and that's what they want to do. So I'd like to open up that as an option for discussion.
Make a point of order. So is the item that you're proposing, Mr. Mayor, allowing the testing service as a conditional use and then having distribution and manufacturing be part of a ban, or what?
That's what I think is clear that I think the people have spoken loud and clear both at the ballot box and here tonight, and I hear it loud and clear. Especially appreciate what Chief Fordall had to say. And so, yeah, I would like to strike or go ahead and ban the distribution and the manufacturing. But the questions I have would be in regarding the lab and the delivery, which are not necessarily just cannabis-related businesses. I mean, who's to say no to a soils and so?
Can we get clarity for the public to understand why we're discussing the lab? That this should come up that it's not only just cannabis that this would be catering to. It's also a way for, it's a solution for this region for the wine industry. It's a solution.
Please, we have looked at the lab testing, and part of what they want to do is they do want to do tests for wine, for cherries, for almonds, for water, for soils, for other things as well. That would be, okay. Okay.
I'll do
Okay.
I just, in regards to the testing at the lab, I know wineries have to send out their water to be tested on a monthly basis, and this lab said that their testing would be for waters, soils, yes, cannabis, and also into the organics, and that the closest lab that does any of that testing is down in Fresno. So, and don't say no, because that's a fact. It's like,
Okay.
so the testing lab is going to be
Well-
open for other industries also.
Well, we could always ban the cannabis part and just keep the other things. They could do a lab that way.
Well, that's right. That's right. So one way to possibly do it would have the ordinance be silent on labs and deliveries and ban marijuana activities.
Well, but would you ban that, but would we be banning the marijuana in the lab testing? Because, because I know when I went to that meeting with Patrick Sullivan, that he mentioned very little, well, his project, excuse me, but anyway, that that the plan for the lab was emphasized, when I was there, was the cannabis. That was emphasized over anything else. So it's whether or not they would want to continue with the lab without cannabis as being part of the testing.
Where I would find that problematic is how to get into the business and say, okay, you know, how to regulate that, because
Well-
I can understand if a business is 100% is cannabis related, we can say no to that, and that makes sense.
But if we banned cannabis in the city, then it would just be automatic. It would be automatic
Okay.
that they would say they couldn't, and, oh, Joe.
I think to remove the delivery piece is just too fine a distinction. I think it all needs to be in the ban.
And the other problem for delivery is that how can you enforce the delivery? That's the thing I was looking at. I mean, we did make a mistake. We have to have 21-year-olds that are delivering. But how do we, so that they cannot leave it on the doorstep? And
I think what I'm recommending
There would
is-
just be so many things that you couldn't enforce in.
I think what I'm recommending is that we be silent on the delivery part. I mean, it's just a personal rights thing. If you want to order it, order it.
We're talking about safety, and I would much rather have them registered with our police department, know who's coming in, than having our constituents grown in their backyard and having issues in what the fire department has expressed at the front podium and know where it's coming from, and it's a safe avenue. There's the restrictions that PD has added to this, we can add to it. But not allowing a personal right because we don't like it, is not
Derek,
providing safety to
The
constituents.
urgency ordinance gives us a position from which to act, correct?
Correct.
So as time goes by and things become clear, if we ban this A to Z as stated in option 2, at the end of 45 days, we haven't learned what we want to learn, so we continue it. It gets out into that year period, and something more comes to light that allows delivery to come into our thinking. Is it possible to come back and revisit that then?
Yes.
So from a total ban position, there's no harm in that at this point, given we want some consideration in the future.
So the idea here is that you're taking a step that would exist for no more than 2 years. You'd have an extension at the 45-day juncture and then an extension at the 1-year juncture. But the idea is that you would be putting something into place that's permanent. So if you take action tonight to say we're not going to allow deliveries yet, it doesn't mean that you can't come back later on and allow deliveries under conditions that you've studied.
And that's what I was thinking. I know that Cupertino, what they did is they were really doing a study to see whether or not over this period of time that they have, they were doing a study to see how it works out, how the state regulations happen, looking at everything that's going on throughout the state of California. And so they're just giving themselves a lot of time, which is wise. And I would just read this. It says, "The City of Cupertino has extended an urgency ordinance," this is the third extension, "to give city officials 12 more months to come up with a plan for dealing with commercialized marijuana within the city limits." And they said, the staff said the moratorium will help the city retain its ability to regulate, allow, or prohibit non-medical marijuana dispensaries, and so on and so on. So what they're doing is giving themselves time to study it, and that's what I had mentioned in the beginning. It says, in our whereas, it says, in order to protect people and for safety, and to assure that they're able to, let me think for a minute, that with the health and safety issue, that they therefore said that we could have the consider studying or intending to study within a reasonable time. So if we banned it now, and then we studied it, okay, over this, we have 2 years to do it, then if we do change and have an agreement, or if the public and if the majority changes their mind on it, or we put a vote before the people for various things, then we would have the support of the people. Well, I know, and I know that I'm saying over a 2-year period, you know.
Okay, so.
May I make a point of order, just to try to facilitate council decision-making? Obviously, you know, this is clearly going to be a difficult decision. You have a lot of, you've heard a lot tonight, but and Mr. Mayor, I've heard you make a suggestion. I don't know how all of you feel about that, but if the idea is to take the ban ordinance, but to be silent on the testing service, my interpretation would mean that testing services would then be lawful, whether they're just for cannabis or whether they would be for other uses. And what I would suggest, if that is an option the council wants to consider, would be to work with the ban ordinance, and then on section 2 at page 4, you would simply remove paragraph 5, which defines testing service, and then if you flip on to page 5, you would remove section D, which has the prohibition, and then that section E would then move up to section D. And what that would do is that it would take the ban, it would ban everything, but because it's silent on testing services, it would allow a testing service to be permitted with a conditional use permit. And so if that's sort of a compromise, and again, I'm not telling you how to vote or how to compromise, but that is a way to do something. I think. So if that's a motion somebody wants to make, then you're entitled to make that.
Well.
Okay, well, it requires, Defew, one more, and I'm going to ask Chief Fordall to remove you.
And why don't you have you go with me, too?
I'll go, I'm happy.
You're changing the ordinance, you closed public comment.
Chief Fordall?
You're changing the ordinance. So nobody can talk about the change.
Chief, please remove Mr. Defew.
Are you happy to be here? You jackass.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah, he was.
Okay, so anything we do tonight requires a 4-1 vote, is that correct, Derek?
Yeah, it does require a 4-1 vote.
You open to motions?
We are open to motions.
I motion that we adopt option 2, the complete ban, as is, without any silence issue.
I second it.
Okay. So as further discussion, the deliveries portion, if allowing home deliveries, and it's like ordering the stuff on Amazon, if allowing home deliveries would prevent somebody from growing indoors and creating a fire hazard, or prevent somebody from driving to and from a dispensary, creating danger, it's a public safety issue, and I'm wondering if having the deliveries is not only a personal rights issue, but also a public safety issue. I don't know.
I don't know either, but it's too fine a distinction. And I think, asked and answered, it could be reconsidered later.
Sure, and there are reconsiderations.
For the sake of
Yeah.
getting the base position established, the motion's been made and seconded. Let's see how the vote goes.
Right.
Okay.
Could
any
we
further
get a roll
discussion?
call vote when you vote?
It is a roll call vote.
Okay, it's a roll call vote. We'll start with Linda.
Aye.
Aye.
Amanda?
Nay.
Nay.
You do have to vote.
Aye.
So a 3-2 vote, it does not carry because it requires a 4/5 vote. So that is just for the ban ordinance altogether.
Okay, so like, again, to compromise, let's consider the delivery issue, staying silent on the delivery issue, not condoning it, not regulating it at all, just, it's not something that we encourage or discourage, it's something that would be available to our residents if they choose to use it, and it would be something that would be invisible to any of the neighbors, as opposed to a pot grow or, risking somebody who uses marijuana driving to and from out-of-town dispensaries.
So let me,
Okay.
hold on, let me, just so I can formulate what that motion would be, and if Councilmember Follendorf wants to make that, are we banning testing services as well under this proposal?
On the lab and the
Yes.
delivery.
Okay, so the ban on testing, so basically, if this is the a potential compromise, all you would do is remove paragraph E from the ban ordinance, which is page 5.
Wait a minute.
And that would remove the prohibition on deliveries. Everything else would be in. And so I want to make sure we get an accurate record so that the clerk and I can publish the proper ordinance.
Where are you saying again?
So look at page 5 on the ban ordinance.
Let's get a motion on the table
Page
first.
5?
Okay.
I move. And which one? Testing services?
Yes, no, page 5 on the ban ordinance.
Yes.
It's paragraph E.
Paragraph E, okay.
That discusses delivery. So if you remove that paragraph E, then this ordinance becomes silent on deliveries, and I think that's the scenario or Mayor Behill is
Could I-
talking about.
I asked, then in the future, with the 45-day and all of that, it would no longer become an issue. It wouldn't even come up, period, at all, if it's silent. The delivery, could we consider it again?
That can all be revisited.
Yeah, it could all be revisited, but for purposes of tonight, if you remove that, then we're silent. I would note that, as a practical matter, people aren't technically allowed to engage in commercial marijuana uses until January 1st of next year, so the reality is, people shouldn't be delivering for the rest of this year anyway. But, so if you remove that paragraph, then that would accomplish the scenario Councilmember Behill mentioned. So for purposes of a motion that, I just want to, so we have a clear record, that could be made still.
Okay, do we have a motion? Move to what?
Repeating what Derek just said.
So you want a total ban, but eliminate any mention of deliveries?
Just silent on the lab and deliveries.
On lab too?
Yeah.
So we have a motion,
Repeating what you
We-
in your last motion,
So
with
we have-
silence on the delivery.
we have a motion then to ban all marijuana as option 2, with the exception of allowing the testing labs and being silent on the testing labs and deliveries. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, it's been moved by Vice Mayor Follendorf. Do we have a second? I'll second it. Roll call vote. We'll start with Veronica this time.
I just need clarification, so we're saying that we're going to ban everything and then be silent on the testing and the delivery?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Joe?
No.
Linda?
No.
Aye. Okay, the last compromise I can think of is, again, to be silent just on deliveries only. And do we have anyone that will make that motion?
A comment on that. as written, this section E is not very definitive, other than just generally say deliveries. What comes to mind in my mind is an open bed truck delivering 6 full plants to everybody's house on the block. That's kind of the worst case scenario. That's different than an Amazon package coming in, a little 3x5 box with whatever the allowed delivery is. Again, it gets the police at odds with, where are you going with that and what are you doing with it? It's the way it's written. So I can't support that, silencing that either.
Yeah.
So would you support banning it and then adding the language to the ban that we have in the other one, the delivery regulation language?
Which is?
Which is what's
It's the
in
same, I think, of both, isn't it?
I thought they were
It's the
both the
same.
same.
That was-
Maybe not.
No.
No, I think, wait a second.
It would be incorporating section 4.
In terms of registering with the police and all that stuff?
Yes. So incorporating that in, as opposed to a ban on deliveries.
On the delivery, the biggest problem I still find is, that they can have a pound. They're not to leave it at the doorstep. It's just, to me, it's going to be presented so it's really available to any kids in the house, children walking by, because I think that you're not going to be able to enforce any of that. I think that's the problem.
I would say, Scott, I'd be supportive of a compromise that says delivery regulated on a complete ban otherwise.
What is it saying again?
So let me.
It's got the police involved in registration with
Yeah,
respect
I
to
mean,
who's
tighter
delivering
and all
it
that,
and all
certainly.
that.
Let me
Maybe
frame
so.
this. On the ban ordinance, page 4, you have paragraph.
There's no point of order, but.
Sit down. I am talking. This is my floor. Sit down.
What was on the piece of paper that was handed?
Sit down. Public comment is closed. We are trying to formulate a motion.
This is part of this.
Mr. Mayor, so so the motion.
I've got no problem. It says a council member needs a break. All right, I'm trying to wrap this up so we can take a break. We've been sitting here for a long time without water.
So the answer is, or the motion, just so we formulate for the record, section 2 on the ban ordinance, there's on page 4, we have that paragraph A, and then we have delivery defined in paragraph 2. So we will remove that, and then we will remove paragraph E on page 5. So what we're doing is we're taking the delivery language out of the ban, and then what we will do is we will move over section 4, the delivery language from the regulate ordinance.
Correct.
And we'll make that, and we'll add that to the end of the ordinance. And so that's clear to me. That I'll make sure that's clear with the clerk. So if that's a compromise motion and someone can make that motion, we know how to record that.
Could I have just one question on that?
Yes.
Is, we would be able to add to the delivery, other added as in that 45-day.
Absolutely, yeah. That,
So
as
we could
go
make
forward,
it tighter.
absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Okay. So do we have a motion?
Yeah, a motion to support the movement of the delivery statements and the complete ban otherwise.
I'll second.
Okay, we might have something going here. All right, Linda?
Aye.
Joe?
Aye.
Veronica?
Aye.
Amanda?
Aye.
5-0. Aye. Okay. Let's see, the next item on the agenda is adjournment. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, very much.
Thank you for coming in.
Yeah.
Hey.